Chapter 797. Hee hee. You don't seem to believe me? It's all right. I've lived for countless years. I've witnessed the rise and fall of huge empires. The only thing that will never lie is time. Time will prove everything in the end. Sensing the suspicion and disgust in Andre's eyes, the Lich was not angry at all. Instead, he smiled meaningfully. For an old monster like him who had lived for thousands or even tens of thousands of years, he no longer cared about what others thought of him, let alone a little suspicion and disgust. However, Andre obviously could not do that. Staring at the two flickering cold lights in the Lich's eyes, he took a deep breath and said, "Time will prove everything? No, I can't wait that long. Explain. You need to give me an explanation." "You want an explanation?" The Lich asked playfully, then nodded. "All right, then I'll give you an explanation. Actually, everything originated from a prophecy." In the next 10 minutes, he selectively explained Emmanuel's prophecy, as well as the birth of the Arcane Eye. Some of the content was hidden, especially when it came to the question of choice. He did not even mention a word about it, deliberately creating the illusion that the gods were the archenemies of mages in an attempt to mislead Andre. Unfortunately, Andre was not the kind of idiot who would believe whatever others said. He narrowed his eyes and listened while his brain worked at high speed. Not long after, the corners of his mouth curled up slightly into a mysterious smile. He then asked, "According to what you said, isn't my situation very dangerous? Your existence has always been very dangerous. Whether it's the Arcane Eye itself or the knowledge system from another world, you're the target of countless forces. I can assure you that if the slightest bit of news about these two things gets out, you'll soon see the terrifying forces that are usually hidden under the surface. This world is very dangerous. What you've seen, heard, and encountered are like algae floating on the surface of the sea. The real big fish are deeper in the sea. They're waiting, hibernating. Some of these forces even scare me. Of course, apart from us, no other forces know of your identity. Even those gods who sensed the awakening of the Arcane Eye were merely guessing. You must learn how to conceal yourself before they find you and learn how to control the power of the Arcane Eye. Otherwise, it won't be long before you'll be torn to pieces by enemies filled with malice." Even though the Lich's tone was neither fast nor slow, giving people the illusion that he was calm and collected. It was as if he wasn't talking about a huge secret, but an unimportant chat. However, Andre could feel that the other party was warning him solemnly. At the same time, he was hinting that only the legendary mages left behind by the ancient magical civilization had the ability to help him get out of danger. "What do you want from me?" Never use the so-called prophecy as an excuse. In my opinion, there's only one thing in the world that can make strangers friendly, and that is benefits. I have benefits that you urgently need. Andre hit the nail on the head and pointed out the core of the conversation. In fact, as a pragmatist through and through, he didn't care who he was working with. As long as he could get enough benefits, it didn't matter even if it was the demons of the bottomless abyss. If there was something about Andre that was completely different from the natives of Oraire, it was that he didn't have a clear alignment. Apart from the bottom line that he held in his heart, he didn't care about good or evil, nor did he care about chaos or order. He would lean towards whichever side was beneficial to him. The Lich quickly noticed this and let out a deep and hoarse laugh. He. It seems that the world you're in is indeed very interesting. I can feel the pure utilitarianism in your soul. That's right, we have designs on you. To be precise, we hope that you can become one of us after you've grown up. In order to fight against the gods, in order to pursue the eternal truth that exists in the entire universe. You're also a mage. I believe that you can definitely sense that the world we live in, the universe, is moving according to a certain trajectory. It's neither time nor space nor God. It's something incomprehensible and indescribable with words. The meaning of a mage's existence is to constantly explore until we find out its existence, then understand it and reveal it. Of course, we're also very interested in the knowledge you have. If you're willing to share, then we're also willing to exchange magic knowledge of the same value. What do you think? I see. Andre nodded thoughtfully, and a trace of understanding appeared in his eyes. He then smiled and sighed. Sigh, you wanted to invite me, so you gave me so many benefits and conveniences. But the problem is that I don't want to accept your invitation, and I don't want to be enemies with the gods. Because the gods are born from faith, and faith is something that mortals can never get rid of. Perhaps many smart people can see through the hypocrisy of faith, but smart people are always the minority. More than 90% of the people in the world are fools. According to the relationship between faith and the gods, even if you kill all the gods, as long as their churches and believers are still there, they can be resurrected again. Obviously, you can't kill all the mortals who believe in the gods. After all, this means that you have to kill more than 90% of the intelligent life in the world. As a soul that came from an era of information explosion, Andre knew better than anyone else the horror of faith. Not to mention this world with real gods. Even in the 21st century on Earth, where material and spiritual matters were highly developed, there were still countless people who would choose to believe in a God that didn't exist and would be willing to give up everything for it. It couldn't be helped. Humans were a type of life that liked to pursue self-realization, and unreserved devotion to the gods was the best embodiment of this. Faith could fill the emptiness of the soul. Faith could make people self-disciplined and strong. Faith could raise the level of morality. Faith could bring order to society. It could be said that whether it was from the perspective of a ruler or the needs of human society, faith could not be completely eliminated. Since faith could not be eliminated, it meant that the gods could never be eliminated. Andre didn't want to be enemies with a group of powerful gods who had the ability to resurrect infinitely. At least, he wouldn't do so before he found a way to truly eliminate them. Chapter 798. Staring at Andre's unwavering eyes, the Lich laughed heartily. After a full minute, he shook his skull and sighed. How surprising. He shook his head and sighed. How surprising. You have no faith, or even reject faith, but you have such a thorough understanding of the relationship between faith and the gods. If a god heard what you said just now, he would definitely send down his blessings and invite you to be his chosen one. Yes, we can never eliminate all the gods, but we can selectively eliminate those who are hostile to mages, especially those who participated in the destruction of the magic empire. Sooner or later, they will pay the price for what they have done. In fact, on the eve of the destruction of the civilization, we have already developed a way to completely eliminate the existence of the gods, and there is more than one way. This is why the gods have never dared to take any action even though they know the existence of us. We have the technology to kill them. The gods are not as scary as you think, and they're not as omniscient and omnipotent as they preach. In fact, most of the gods in this world were born from the deepest desires of the mortals, and desires are the beginning of faith. For example, the chosen god of justice was originally just a paladin, but the place where he lived was full of war and slaughter. The people there longed for peace and order, so under the prayers of countless mortals, the forces of kindness and order began to gather in him. Finally, when this force gathered to a certain extent, he was gradually replaced by some kind of pure consciousness and became the god of justice. In other words, the gods are a group of prisoners firmly imprisoned in their own domain. They will never be able to do anything against their priesthood, so you don't have to be so afraid. Although the Lich's words revealed contempt and disdain for the gods all the time, Andre did not feel that he was qualified to be an enemy of the gods. He just shook his head non-committally. Prisoners? You used the word very cleverly. Maybe the gods are indeed imprisoned in their own domain, but for mortals, they are still invincible enemies. I'm sorry, I have no intention of getting involved in a war between you and the gods, so let's end this topic here. There was no doubt that he had once again rejected the olive branch offered by a legendary mage without even the slightest hesitation. All right, since you don't want to join us now, I won't force you. As mentioned before, time will prove everything. Please remember that a person like you who diligently pursues knowledge and truth will sooner or later stand on the opposite side of the gods. I look forward to what choice you will make when that day comes. Seeing that his persuasion was ineffective, The Lich did not fly into a rage out of humiliation, nor did he show any emotions of disappointment. He was calm as if nothing had happened. In this world full of lies and betrayals, trust was a luxury. Especially for someone as vigilant as Andre, he didn't expect to get the result he wanted through 1 or 2 conversations. After a short test, the two of them fell into a short silence as they digested the content of their conversation and used it as a basis to judge each other's thoughts. After a full 5 minutes, Andre was the first to break the silence. He pointed at his left eye and said in a half-joking tone, "Master, I think the main purpose of your visit today is not to invite me, but for this eye that is constantly emitting energy rings. Tell me, how do you plan to hide it? I have to say that you're very observant and analytical, young man. Yes, I can indeed help you get rid of the trouble in front of you, but there's still a small problem that hasn't been solved." With that, the Lich's face that had no muscles or skin seemed to show a hint of mockery. "Oh, what's the problem?" Andre suddenly had a bad feeling. The Lich went straight to the huge map and stared at the triangles that were marked on it. He said in a deep voice, "According to Orlando, you seem to be planning to seize control of this archipelago and take over the city that the pirates have been operating for hundreds of years as completely as possible." "Yes, as you can see, the geographical location here is unique. Coupled with the long-term free economic policy, it will be a powerful force that can play a decisive role at critical moments." Andre knew that his actions could not be hidden from the Lich, so he admitted it openly. The Lich nodded approvingly and commented with a smile, "Hee, using the opponent's plan to plant a spy, a very smart choice. Loretta probably still doesn't know that there's a fatal dagger pressed against his back." "A fatal dagger? I thought that in your eyes, everything we did was just a farce." Andre shrugged self-deprecatingly. "Please don't beat around the bush. Just say it. What is the so-called small problem?" "It's very simple. I plan to summon the physical body of the Count of Hell, Nim Yukub, in this city, then let your left eye devour it, and turn it into the necessary energy to awaken the consciousness that is still in a deep slumber." Speaking until here, the Lich stretched out a finger and lightly drew a circle at the bottom right corner of the map and continued. "Of course, doing so requires a certain amount of risk. After all, the opponent is still a legendary creature. Once it appears in the material world, it will inevitably be accompanied by slaughter and destruction. According to my deduction, within a radius of 50 to 100 meters from the summoning location, whether it's buildings or people, everything will be destroyed. You'd better be mentally prepared." Looking at the area that took up 1/10 of the city on the map, Andre instantly drew in a cold breath and immediately asked, "This is the small problem you mentioned?" "With the power of the Count of Hell, the entire Sardinia will be finished if the situation goes out of control." The Lich waved his hand nonchalantly. "Don't worry, young man. It's just a noble of hell. I've imprisoned people who were even more difficult to deal with than him. Moreover, you don't have any choice now. Either you completely awaken the consciousness of the Arcane Eye, or you'll be discovered by the Church of the Gods." "All right, you're right. I really don't have the right to be picky. I only hope that you can control the scope of the disaster to the smallest area. I don't want to take over a scene of desolation and destruction." Saying that, Andre's face revealed a trace of a bitter smile. He had originally wanted to stop the summoning ritual in advance to minimize the losses in the city, but now it seemed impossible. Chapter 799. A wise man once said that if you want to get something, you must first give something. Otherwise, if you blindly ask for something, you will sooner or later meet with a disaster. Obviously, in the few exchanges he had with the Lich, Andre had always been the one asking. Whether it was the book that recorded a large number of potion formulas or the authority of the Shadow Web, they were all precious treasures that ordinary people could only dream of. Perhaps to a legendary spellcaster who had inherited the huge database of the ancient magical civilization, these little things were nothing at all. However, Andre was not willing to put himself in the position of being given charity at all. He needed a relatively equal status and identity, especially in terms of knowledge. It was completely possible to achieve an equivalent exchange. He believed that a group of legendary mages who had been engaged in the research of supernatural forces for a long time would definitely have a strong interest in the physics, chemistry, biology, mechanics, microbiology, cosmology, dynamics, atomic energy, microscopic particles, quantum mechanics, and so on Earth. They might even research new legendary spells with this as the center. Of course, as a smart person, Andre would not reveal too much at once. He intended to reveal a small part of it to test the Lich's reaction. Just as he was thinking about where to start, the Lich suddenly asked without turning his head, "How much do you know about the power of the arcane eye? Or rather, how much do you feel?" Andre hesitated for a second and quickly replied, "Not much. I only know that it seems to be able to raise my profession level, create some magical items, potions, and scrolls out of thin air, and convert some knowledge directly into experience. Since the last awakening, I have added a new detection function. If I stare at someone for more than 5 seconds, the specific information of that person will automatically appear in my retina. However, this ability consumes a lot of my spirit. I have only used it a few times. As expected, it has not been fully awakened. In other words, your power is not enough to control it." Saying that, the 2 cold lights in the Lich's eye socket surged. He turned around and stared at the left eye that was emitting an energy ring. "What do you mean? Is it because my mage level is not high enough?" Andre subconsciously frowned. He did not quite understand what the Lich was trying to say. The Lich smiled and shook his head. "No. What I mean is that you still don't understand what the arcane eye is, and you don't understand the huge impact it will have on you." Upon hearing these words that contained hints, Andre instantly became serious. He raised his right hand to touch his left eye and said softly, "You're right. I know too little about it, and there are no records of the mystical eye in the books. If you don't mind, can you tell me more about it?" "No problem. I'm more than happy to introduce to you one of the greatest and most outstanding creations of the ancient magic civilization. First, you have to understand that the arcane eye isn't a simple object. It's a special life form that has life, thoughts, feelings, and even an independent view of the world and values. It can answer all kinds of questions for its wielder and help the wielder rapidly become stronger. Although I'm not sure how it showed you this ability, there's no doubt that it's the reason why you're able to level up so quickly. To be exact, it transforms all kinds of energy into the magic power you need and continuously sharpens your spellcasting skills. Generally speaking, it will show its ability in the most familiar and easy-to-understand way. That's why, in theory, everyone sees it differently. Secondly, the arcane eye will only choose those who it thinks are qualified to wield it. Any form of robbery or killing will be met with strong resistance. In serious cases like what you've seen just now, it will try to devour the enemy directly. If the devouring fails, it will tear through space and escape. As far as I know, there's no man or god in this world who has the power to stop this from happening. Lastly, those who are chosen by the arcane eye must have special characteristics that ordinary people don't have. Only when this special characteristic is activated can one truly master the arcane eye and become its master, and not be in a dominant position like you are now. However, these are only the manifestations of the other eye, which is the eye of the past. Yours is the eye of the future, which was thrown into the center of the multiverse when it was born. There might be some slight differences. Andre didn't know if it was an illusion, but he felt that the Lich's entire body was now emitting a dangerous aura. In particular, the way the Lich looked at him was like a mad scientist looking at a lab rat, full of the desire to explore. Fortunately, these desires had yet to be turned into practical actions. Otherwise, he wouldn't have the confidence to deal with a berserk legendary spellcaster. Just like that, Andre listened to the Lich's description of the arcane eye while comparing his own situation and quickly came to some conclusions. Firstly, the information similar to game data that often appeared in his retina was actually a part of the arcane eye's ability. It was to allow him to better understand and adapt to this world full of supernatural powers. Secondly, the so-called killing of lives and completing missions to obtain EXP turned out to be a process of constantly collecting energy and feeding it back to himself. At the same time, it was also a threshold set up to train his ability. Thirdly, the arcane eye couldn't be forcefully seized through violent means. Once it had chosen a person, it would accompany that person until their death. Fourthly, if he wanted to unleash the full power of the arcane eye, he would need to have a deep self-awareness and understanding to find out what made him different from others. The more he understood, the more Andre felt that his left eye was far more powerful than he had imagined. It even vaguely involved the transformation between matter, space, and energy. It should be known that this was a super difficult problem that couldn't be solved even in the technologically advanced 21st century Earth. However, it was now done by an eye created by legendary wizards thousands of years ago. Being able to create all kinds of items out of thin air was the most important proof. It was an indescribable shock. Andre didn't know how to describe this world at all. On one hand, it was extremely backward. What ordinary people ate, wore, and used was no different from the European Middle Ages. On the other hand, spellcasters could create countless miracles that scientists didn't even dare to dream of. Huge cities floating in the sky, teleportation magic that could cross space and latitude, creating special life forms with independent personalities and intelligence. After much hesitation, Andre finally took a deep breath and said to the lich standing opposite him, "Master, I think I've more or less understood the secrets of the arcane eye. Now, I have a suggestion. I just happen to have some knowledge here. I wonder if you're interested." Chapter 800. Knowledge. Upon hearing this word, the two cold glints in the lich's eye sockets exploded instantly. The spiritual aura of fear around him was like a boiling pot of oil, releasing continuously. Fortunately, there were no outsiders in the room. Otherwise, the lich would have lost his mind and run away like a madman. However, this change came and went quickly. In just a few seconds, the lich regained his composure and asked calmly, "Tell me, what is your so-called knowledge about?" Looking at the lich's skeletal face that showed no emotions, Andre sighed inwardly. He was indeed an old monster that had lived for thousands of years, to be able to control his emotions so quickly. However, he knew that a legendary mage like him, who had tried almost every possibility in the magical domain, was actually most interested in new knowledge and power systems. The reason he pretended to be indifferent was so that Li could bring out more at once. The mage's attitude towards knowledge had always been that no amount was too much. There were even many legendary mages who tried to specialize in two opposing schools of thought and ended up driving themselves crazy. One had to know that the schools of magic were not divided randomly. They were more like the comprehensive embodiment of one's outlook on life, worldview, and values. Especially the conflict between opposing schools of thought, it was no less than the huge gap between materialism and idealism. Think about it. How could a person be a staunch atheist and then run to believe in a god? The biggest possibility of this was to cause permanent schizophrenia or contradictory multiple personalities. Anyway, it was definitely not normal. Of course, this was only child's play in the long history of magic in Orire. There were even people who directly tore their soul and consciousness apart, with the goal of personally experiencing if they could break through the limits of thinking. It could be said that the mages in this world were 100 times crazier than the scientists on Earth, especially during the most glorious period of the ancient magic civilization. They had the power to destroy the world, and as long as they set the direction of their research, no one could stop them. Infinite energy domain, anti-gravity domain, biological modification domain, life domain, death domain, time domain, space domain, countless technologies and magic that ordinary people would not even dare to imagine were invented one after another. Humans who were originally enslaved rose to become the indisputable overlords of the continent in a very short time. In the end, even the gods became the subject of their research. From a certain perspective, mages should be the purest pursuers of the truth. In order to achieve this goal, They were willing to sacrifice everything, even their own lives and souls. Andre was a little worried. If he told the Lich about the particle collision experiment, would the Lich create a super collider and then create an uncontrollable black hole that would swallow the planet in one go? Don't think that this is a joke. A legendary maid's ability is completely capable of doing so. A philosopher once said that a powerful force without any restraints was a destructive disaster. Without binding, Andre would not easily spread knowledge that was more dangerous, such as nuclear energy and biochemical viruses. The Lich seemed to have sensed something and suddenly laughed without warning. Ha 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 ha. Young man, you seem to be a little hesitant. Is that knowledge very dangerous? Don't worry, we already have a lot of dangerous knowledge and spells, enough to destroy the entire continent. From the Lich's confident demeanor, it could be seen that this was not a boast, but a simple statement. In fact, in the tens of thousands of years of development of the Oleo continent, there were many forces that had the power to destroy the world. Excluding the evil beasts and the myths and legends, there were as many as 3 intelligent races, including the survivors of the ancient magic civilization, the elves who also had excellent magic skills, and the creator race that had suddenly disappeared. Thinking of this, Andre immediately shook his head with a bitter smile. No, Master, my knowledge is very different from yours. The biggest difference is the applicability. Perhaps it is difficult to describe clearly with words, so please take a look at the real thing. Saying that, he took out the revolver that he did not want to carry and handed it over. Obviously, the Lich had never seen such a strange object before. He immediately took it in his hands and carefully examined it while muttering to himself. Interesting, the main body is made of mithril, and at the same time, it has 2 spells, haste and counter. If I'm not wrong, it should be a long-range weapon. That's right, it is a long-range weapon. Anyone who pulls the trigger will immediately shoot out a fatal bullet. You could try it yourself. Andre introduced calmly. Pull the trigger? Is it here? Then let me give it a try. After the Lich found the trigger position, he immediately aimed it at his own skull and pulled the trigger without hesitation. Asterisk bang. Asterisk accompanied by a loud sound. The bullet that was accelerated by gunpowder, rifling, and magic burst out and directly hit the center of the Lich's forehead. What was unbelievable was that the bullet that could easily pierce through the best armor did not break the Lich's skull. It only left a dent on it, and there were many cracks around the dent. The Lich was also surprised by this result. He raised his hand and touched the place where the bullet hit and sighed. What shocking power! Is this a weapon from your world? Can ordinary people use it? One had to know that the Lich's body was strengthened by special magic. Ordinary steel weapons would not even leave a mark on it. Only magic weapons of +2 and above could barely cause some damage, but the bullet that did not have any magic waves did it. Yes, this is a weapon from my world. To be more precise, it is the lowest level of firearms. It is even a type that was eliminated a long time ago. As you can see, it uses the expansion of the air from the chemical explosion as the driving force, and in an instant, it accelerates the bullet to a speed that cannot be seen with the naked eye. Although I used haste to increase the initial speed, in essence it is not magic. It is an ordinary long-range weapon like a crossbow. As long as the technology is mature, it can be used on a large scale for soldiers. In my world, this weapon called a gun is the most basic equipment for an army. There are more advanced weapons like cannons, missiles, nuclear weapons, and so on. Nuclear weapons, especially, can produce a temperature of hundreds of millions of degrees when they explode. In the blink of an eye, they can destroy everything within 100 kilometers. They all have one thing in common, and that is that they do not require a mage. Even ordinary people can use them. Now you should understand what I am worried about. At the end, Andre became abnormally serious. His eyes were full of warning. Chapter 801. Compared to Aurare's magic. What was the advantage of Earth's technology? Ever since he first came into contact with the concept of magic, Andre had been thinking about it. As he learned more and more about it, he slowly came up with his own set of ideas. From a perspective of destructive power alone, There was no essential difference between detonating a nuclear bomb and a powerful magic spell that could trigger large-scale earthquakes and volcanic eruptions. The civilization built by humans was so fragile that any one of them could cause a devastating disaster. Perhaps some people would say that nuclear weapons were more terrifying because the nuclear pollution it brought would take hundreds or even thousands of years to completely eliminate. During this time, humans would not be able to farm or live on this land. But in fact, earthquakes and volcanic eruptions were far more terrifying than nuclear weapons. After all, the former could be avoided by digging underground bunkers in advance. The latter's power could even cause the continental shelf to sink, and the whole area would be buried alive. Unless one could fly into the air, the chance of survival would be zero. Since the power of magic was so powerful, what was the advantage of technology? In Andre's view, the greatness of technology was its convenience and popularity. It did not even need to be very smart. Through simple learning and training, even illiterate people could become terrifying killing machines. Magic was the exact opposite. Although it was powerful, it was not suitable for ordinary people. The threshold alone could eliminate more than 99% of ordinary people. As the spell-casting level increased, the soul and intelligence of a mage would be greatly strengthened. Gradually, they would break away from the category of ordinary people and develop into a humanoid biological computer. With Andre's as high as 23 points of intelligence, he could clearly feel this change. It was like a person who could not even count from 1 to 100, but suddenly he could calculate multivariate functions in his mind. His whole thinking was magnified tens of times or even hundreds of times. Clarity, precision, speed, a new height, a new world view and values. It was as if the mysterious veil of the originally hazy world was suddenly lifted, and everything in front of him became incomparably clear. For a real mage, there was no secret in the thoughts and plans of ordinary people. The difference between the two was as obvious as the difference between a child and an adult. If technology raised the height of civilization as a whole, then magic represented the limit that mortals could reach. Once science reached a certain level, every member of society would be able to enjoy the benefits it brought, from food to transportation to the medical system. It was a relatively complete system, and there was no sudden or accidental change. Magic, on the other hand, was the exact opposite. Every advancement in magic was the result of a sudden whim of one or two geniuses. Perhaps there was no such theoretical support in the past, and even if it succeeded, it would not have much of an impact on society as a whole. In essence, magic was completely unrealistic and did not have a complete system. It all depended on the imagination and creativity of the individual mages. To summarize it with a simple analogy, science was like the components produced on an assembly line. It was large in quantity, simple, fast, and efficient, suitable for large-scale promotion and popularization. Magic, on the other hand, was the work of artists, full of accidents and uncertainties. Even if a spell with the power to destroy the world was invented, it was usually only mastered by a few legendary mages. What would happen if the power of technology was popularized in the magic world? The answer was simple. There were only two possibilities. First, productivity would explode at an extremely terrifying speed, causing an impact on the existing feudal system. The nobles with real power would recruit a large number of soldiers, develop military equipment crazily, and then use advanced firearms to start wars. Gradually, the civilians would realize that the nobles and professionals were not as scary as they thought. They could use the weapons in their hands to overthrow their rule. Then, it would slowly evolve into large-scale conflicts and riots. Finally, the feudal rule would be retired from the stage of history, and human society would enter a new era. When technology developed to a certain level, people would one day turn their attention to the gods again and reproduce the scene of the ancient magic civilization, the war between humans and gods. But this time, it would not be so easy for the gods to win. The mass production of high-energy weapons would be enough to make them pay a terrible price, or even wipe them out. Second, when productivity developed to a certain level, the gods would suddenly realize the changes that might happen in the future. They would brazenly start a religious war, stifling the development of science and technology, especially Andre. Even if he was lucky enough not to be killed, he would have to live a life of hiding in the future. Obviously, neither of these were the results that Andre wanted. So, when spreading scientific knowledge, he always maintained a cautious attitude. However, the Lich thought the opposite. When he heard that such weapons could be used even by ordinary people, the coldness in his eyes skyrocketed. It was as if he had seen countless puppet armies attacking the kingdoms of the gods and detonating nuclear weapons one after another. After a long silence, he slowly opened his mouth and said, "Very interesting. You have shown me a completely different system and prospect. Now tell me, is this precious knowledge stored in your precious brain?" Andre hesitated for a moment, then immediately nodded and admitted, "Yes, although most of it is just principles and concepts, I believe that with the power you have, it should not be too difficult to restore it." He knew very well that magic was a magical power that could replace some of the advanced laboratory equipment on Earth. So, as long as he had the corresponding materials, even a small number of Big Ivan would not be a problem to play with. "Very good, very good. I am now more and more convinced that you are the person in the prophecy who can bring about the great revival of magic. Tell me, which part of the knowledge do you plan to share this time? I hope it is the thing called nuclear weapons." As he spoke, the Lich finally no longer concealed his inner desire. The magic power that exuded from his body was suffocating. "Sorry, Master, the knowledge I will share this time does not include weapons, but another very interesting and practical thing. It is called a computer." As the last word escaped his mouth, a mysterious smile appeared on Andre's face. It looked so strange and creepy. Chapter 802. Computer? What's that? The Lich had never heard of such a name before. His tone was filled with confusion. You can understand it as a special device that replaces the brain. In the world I came from, many complicated calculations and simulations are done by computers. Most of the time, people only need to input various factors and wait for the results. Without computers, many research results can't be completed by the human brain alone. Even the smartest brain can't calculate as fast as the worst computer. In order to give the Lich a better understanding, Andre raised his hands and whispered an incantation. Soon, under the effect of a level 0 arcane spell, magic trick, the appearance of an ordinary computer and its internal structure appeared in the air. He pointed at the complicated large-scale integrated circuit and explained, "As you can see, these machines use extremely advanced semiconductor technology. They integrate billions of things we call transistors in very small places. Take level 5 arcane spells, for example. An ordinary mage would need several hours to several days to successfully analyze and understand a new and complicated spell model. However, if it's a computer, it won't even take a 10,000th of a second. It will be able to decipher the core of the spell in an instant and list out the necessary steps to simplify the learning process. This way, the mage can focus more on other aspects. In other words, if we can replicate computers in this world, then we have the foundation to mass-produce mages. Even ordinary people can learn complicated arcane spells below level 7 with the help of computers. Think about it. If the ratio of mages goes from 1,000th, or even 1,000th to 1/10th, 1/5, or even 1/3, what kind of changes would that bring to this world? Don't forget that if a power system wants to gain absolute dominance, it's not determined by its upper limit. It's the lower limit, the foundation. Look, there are places on this continent that reject mages, priests, and druids, but there's never been a place that rejects warriors. Why? Because warriors have the lowest threshold among all professions. To be precise, there's no threshold at all. As long as one is healthy and perseveres in training, even an idiot can become a qualified warrior. Perhaps you're always looking at the gods high above and inadvertently forget what the most important thing is. The reason why the ancient magic civilization was so glorious and dazzling was not because of dozens or hundreds of legendary mages, but because of the joint efforts of tens of thousands of ordinary mages. The definition of civilization is the combination of material wealth and spiritual wealth created by a certain race. A few hundred people can't be considered a civilization. There is no doubt that Andre's words were absolutely subversive in Audiobook. It should be noted that ever since the collapse of several large empires that spanned across regions, people no longer paid attention to those complicated and difficult issues. Instead, they shifted their attention to the fanatical pursuit and worship of power, money, and social status. Even the aristocrats, who were the elites of society, rarely realized the importance of infrastructure. Just look at the muddy dirt roads between the towns. They would rather spend hundreds or thousands of gold coins to hold banquets and salons than spend money to build a better paved road. The reason was simple. Infrastructure was a kind of investment that required a lot of long-term investment but could not produce any returns in a short period of time. Coupled with the frequent wars, it could be occupied by the enemy the next day. The gains did not make up for the losses. To some extent, the feudal system and ideology itself were a cage that imprisoned the development of natural science in this world. The intricate aristocratic territories were like pieces of a jigsaw puzzle, dividing the continent into countless small parts. Each part was a relatively independent system. They could levy taxes, assign corvée labor, enact laws, build private armies, set up roadblocks, excavate mines, and so on in their territories. Of course, there was also the famous right of the first night. In order to protect these rights, the aristocrats would launch attacks on anything that could threaten them. Infrastructure was the most important point. Just think about it. If the Oleo continent was filled with smooth asphalt roads, would the aristocracy still exist? The answer was undoubtedly impossible. With the convenience of transportation, the powerful aristocrats would quickly swallow up the smaller aristocrats around them. Through repeated expansions, they would slowly develop into a country with centralized power. As an immortal who had lived for thousands of years, the Lich immediately realized what mass production of mages meant. Two cold lights flashed in his eyes. After a full 5 minutes, he smiled and praised. "Hee, you are indeed very special, whether it is the way of thinking or the angle of looking at the problem. Yes, we have been too focused on researching and exploring the profound theories, and neglected the overall number and level of mages. But it is not too late to realize this. I have to say, you have shown me a wonderful future. If it can be realized, then the great magic civilization will be reborn, even stronger and more glorious than before." Andre smiled non-committally. "Special? No, Master, I am one of a kind in this world. Perhaps I still look very weak now, but I'm not bound by any rules and regulations. I have never had the slightest doubt about the future. I like your confidence, but please be careful not to let it become arrogance. Now let us talk about how to create this thing called a computer. I can't wait." After saying that, the Lich raised his bony arm and waved it lightly. The entire central control room of the Mage Tower was immediately enveloped by a silver-gray energy, completely cutting off the connection with the outside world. Obviously, he did not want the following conversation to be overheard by a third person, so he did not hesitate to use a powerful level 9 arcane spell to ensure that nothing went wrong. Feeling that his connection with the Mage Tower had been forcibly cut off, Andre did not show the slightest bit of panic. The corner of his mouth rose slightly, and he said in a playful tone, "Unfortunately, I have to inform you that with the knowledge and technology you have, it is almost impossible to completely replicate a semiconductor computer like this. However, I have another plan, and that is to use something else to replace it. Before that, I have a small question. How much do you know about mind flayers?" Chapter 803. Mind flayers? The Lich seemed to have thought of something. He raised his head subconsciously and stared at the jeweled headband that Andre was wearing. A hint of curiosity appeared on his skeletal face. However, this curiosity only lasted for less than a second before it was replaced by laughter. "Ha ha! You're really a little guy who likes to be mysterious. No wonder Orlando couldn't figure out where your spiritual equipment came from. Tell me, do you have some sort of connection with the Mind Flayers? Oh, you know that I'm wearing spiritual equipment? Andre raised his eyebrows and pretended to be surprised. In fact, ever since he met the half-elf Archmage, he knew that the Archmage had been secretly inspecting him, so he was already mentally prepared for this. The Lich smiled meaningfully and shook his head. Spiritual energy is a power system that is completely different from magic. We've done systematic research thousands of years ago. When you reach the level of Orlando and I, you'll realize the huge difference between the two, especially that colorless and transparent gem on your forehead. It's as eye-catching as a torch in the dark. All right, I admit that I did get in touch with the Mind Flayers by coincidence. However, this connection may not be as close as you think. It's just a matter of getting what we need. As he spoke, Andre took out the multidimensional bag that he always carried with him and explained the current situation in Addison City. He didn't even hide the contents of the two transactions. Compared to the Mind Flayers who had ulterior motives, he was more willing to trust this legendary mage who had helped him many times. Moreover, he had many ideas in his head that could only be realized with the help of the Lich's power. Looking at the inconspicuous bag, the Lich reached out a finger and gently stirred it twice. He instantly felt the node that connected to the half-plane, as well as the huge and independent sealed space on the other side. Under the precise control of the legendary mage's magical power, the Mind Flayers didn't notice at all. They were still busy instructing the slaves to plant mushrooms on a large scale. Ever since the mastermind discovered that this fungus, which grew at an extremely fast rate, could be used as the staple food for the loath beast and slaves, it ordered them to plant it in places where the environment permitted. It even sent out the magic golems to protect itself. After a full 10 minutes of observation, the Lich slowly retracted his finger and commented with great interest. Very interesting. An underground city expelled from the material world by violent magic energy. Perhaps it's a coincidence, or perhaps it's man-made, but it's the first time I've seen such a large-scale spatial rupture. Tell me, what does this have to do with your substitute? Of course it's related, and it's a very important link. As you can see, Mind Flayers are the most special race in this world. Their brains, in particular, can be described as miraculous. According to the description in the books, after every Mind Flayer died, they would place their brains into the brain pool and perfectly merge with the city's central hub, the mastermind. It could be said that each main brain was made up of thousands of extremely intelligent Mind Flayers. Just like the computer I described earlier, not only did it have computing power that surpassed any individual, it could also store a huge amount of knowledge. There was no rejection. There was no confusion in logic. There was also no violent conflict due to the fusion of too many consciousnesses. Most importantly, it could carry out complex and fuzzy thinking far more advanced and perfect than the computers I know in this aspect. Of course, just looking at its computing power, it might not be fast enough. Even dealing with the collective consciousness of the Mind Flayers would be troublesome. But in my opinion, the mastermind is already a relatively complete prototype of a neural computer. As long as we can capture one and do in-depth research, I believe that most of its shortcomings can be remedied very quickly. Personally, I feel that instead of researching semiconductor integration technology from scratch, it's better to take another approach and start with the Mind Flayers. With the power you have, it shouldn't be too difficult to take down a city of Mind Flayers, right? After saying that, Andre leaned forward slightly, his eyes shining with excitement and fanaticism. It was a neural computer. It was actually using technological means to simulate the brains of living creatures. As everyone knows, the human brain was made up of about 100 billion neurons and 1 trillion nerve bonds. Every neuron was interconnected with thousands of other neurons, and its function was equivalent to a microcomputer. Think about it. A total of 1 trillion microcomputers working at the same time, what kind of scene would that be? From a certain point of view, the overall operating speed of the human brain was equivalent to a quadrillion times per second semiconductor computer function, or even more complex and advanced. But for some reason, humans couldn't fully utilize their brains, let alone control their own brains. Compared to humans, the mind flayers were undoubtedly smarter, and their brains' computing power was also stronger. When thousands of their brains fused together to form a mastermind, Andre couldn't imagine how terrifying it would be. Perhaps with a little modification, they could create a superneural computer that far surpassed the technological level of Earth. As a transmigrator who was eager to obtain more knowledge and uncover the countless mysteries of Oriir, there was nothing more worth investing his energy into trying. The Lich clearly felt the change in Andre's mood and nodded thoughtfully. A very novel point of view, very feasible. You're right. Maybe it's very difficult for others to take down a city of mind flayers, but for me, it's as easy as having afternoon tea, even though I haven't had afternoon tea for thousands of years. So, you're planning to start research in this area? Andre's eyes lit up slightly as he asked softly. Yes, after dealing with all the troubles in the Sardinia Islands, I'll immediately start preparing for research. It's been a long time since a new research topic has excited me, but now I feel the long-lost excitement, as if there's a voice in my heart that can't wait to shout. The Lich laughed as he said this. The magical energy surrounding his body was like a whirlpool, spinning at high speed like a colorful nebula. I understand your feelings at the moment. If it weren't for the mastermind being too powerful, I would have captured one myself to start research. If you don't mind, I have a small request. Can you allow me to watch while you're researching? Andre asked with one hand on his chest and a slight bow. The Lich replied without hesitation, "Of course, I'm very happy to be able to invite you to join us. After all, your brain stores countless knowledge that we can only dream of and all kinds of novel viewpoints." Chapter 804. The Lich had left. Just like when he had arrived, he did not trigger any of the tower's alarms, nor did he attract anyone's attention. It was as if the well-guarded magical defenses were child's play to him. Staring at the special scroll in his hand that was neither metal nor leather, Andre sighed helplessly and muttered to himself, "So this is the power of a legendary mage? So this is the magical technology that the survivors of the ancient magical civilization have mastered? Seems like I still have a long way to go. I can't expect to reach this level for at least a few years. After all, the tower was the ultimate fortress that the mages used to defend against external enemies. Even though the underground tower that Walloon had mentioned was only an inferior version, it did not lack the necessary defenses, including the sturdy tower body that could withstand the impact of a battering ram, the magical traps behind the corridors and hidden doors, the anti-magic runes that could block almost all divination magic and teleportation spells. In short, it was impossible to successfully invade a tower through normal means, unless one had the permission of the tower's owner. However, the Lich had bypassed all the defenses and alarms, easily appearing in the central control room of the tower. Andre did not even know what method the Lich had used. Even though the Lich had not shown any hostility and had even taken the initiative to provide assistance, no one would be willing to have their every move monitored by others, especially a transmigrator like Andre, who valued his privacy. But unfortunately, he didn't have the ability to resist, let alone bargain. Once again, Andre lamented that being weak was a sin. He gently caressed the scroll in his hand that was glowing with platinum light, feeling the strong magical waves coming from it. This was the reward that the Lich had given him after he proposed the idea of using the Mind Reaver's brain to create a neural computer. Its value and preciousness could not be described with words. That's right. It was one of the two sets of magic scrolls that the ancient magical civilization had excavated from the ruins of the Creator's race. It recorded the most primitive, wildest, and precious knowledge that was closest to the essence of magic. At the same time, it was also the starting point of human magic. Back then, countless mages had studied the contents of the scroll one after another, finally creating the current magical system and tens of thousands of arcane spells. It could be said that without these scrolls, there would not be the glory of the human magical civilization. According to the ancient records, These magical scrolls were not like ordinary magic scrolls that only recorded the structure of a spell. Instead, they recorded the characteristics of a certain primitive energy. Through these characteristics and their own understanding of the world, spellcasters could often create dozens or even hundreds of new arcane spells. In other words, apart from the magical system unique to the elves, all the remaining spells in Orire originated from 100 of these scrolls that were neither metal nor leather. Obtaining one of these scrolls was equivalent to obtaining 1% of the total amount of magic available. In fact, it was even possible for him to create a completely new arcana technique that belonged solely to him. To any mage, this was an irresistible temptation. Even Andre, who was used to grand occasions, was slightly nervous and excited. After all, ever since the gods joined forces to destroy the magical civilization, a set of 50 scrolls that were stored in the floating city's Parliament Hall had long since disappeared. As for the other set of 50 scrolls, there was no need to ask to know that they must have been hidden by the legendary mages who were lucky enough to survive. The scroll in his hand was the best proof. It had to be said that the Lich had been very generous in exchanging knowledge. He did not know whether it was because of the so-called prophecy or because the concept of the neural computer had really benefited him a lot. Either way, this scroll definitely made Andre feel that the reward was far greater than the effort. Forcing himself to calm down, he began to carefully examine the 20-centimeter wide, 25-centimeter long thin sheet of gold foil that was as soft and smooth as silk. The silver magic words moved slowly on the surface as if they were alive. The silver magic words did not belong to any known language or writing. There was no way to decipher it, even with level 0 arcane spell, reading magic. However, as long as he focused all his attention, he could obtain an indescribable feeling from it. As this feeling slowly fermented in his mind, the words on the scroll suddenly began to spin and move. In just a few seconds, they formed completely different content. In order to confirm how much content was stored in this precious thin sheet of gold foil, Andre subconsciously sped up his reading speed. In the blink of an eye, an hour had passed. The content on the page changed again and again without any repetition. After another 3 hours, the content that he had seen for the first time reappeared. Without a doubt, if he wanted to finish reading the content on this scroll with his current intelligence, he would need to study without distraction for at least a month. If he wanted to completely understand and convert it into his own, he would need 1 to 3 years. An unbelievable amount of storage. What was even more unbelievable was that the content was all about the same theme, which was to use the power of magic to create constructs, and even life. Different from the existing technology of creating golems, the content on the scroll was to create real life with independent thinking and personality, not a puppet that could only understand simple orders. Once he learned the content on the scroll, Andre could try to create the creatures in the sci-fi movies in his memory. For example, Transformers or half-mechanical, half-biological behemoths. He could not help but feel excited at the thought of being able to personally create a monster that only existed in his imagination. His eyes shone with a feverish light as he muttered to himself, "Hee, this is truly an unimaginable gift. If it's paired with a biological computer modified from the Cortex Prime, and we could train a large number of assembly line mages, the entire world will undergo a huge change." A scholar once said that besides the basic need for victory, what humans yearned for the most was to be recognized and praised by others. And this recognition and praise usually came from the influence an individual had on society. Forcibly changing the structure of society happened to be one of the most extreme and destructive effects. It was because of this desire that many people in history did not hesitate to commit heinous and cruel acts in order to leave a chapter of their own. Obviously, as a normal human male, Andre also had a similar need. He hoped to use the knowledge in his mind to change this backward world without affecting his own safety and interests. But to do this, the first thing he needed was incomparably powerful strength. Chapter 805. Just as Andre began to analyze the scroll in depth, a negotiation was underway in a remote, empty warehouse at the docks of Valen City. On one side was the dainty cat assassin Mia. On the other side was one of Old Bernie's most trusted subordinates, Kinkapard, who was also in charge of intelligence gathering and spying. Like most people who had been exposed to the dark side of human nature for a long time, his expression was gloomy and cold. His gaze was dangerous and sharp, as if he wanted to strip a person from the inside out. However, these little psychological tricks were completely useless against Mia. After all, Orire was a world where strength reigned supreme. If one didn't have enough strength, they wouldn't be able to accomplish anything with just a bit of cleverness. The two looked at each other for a full 5 minutes before Kinkapard knocked on the table lightly and said slowly, "I know you, and I know what you've done," including approaching Patty with ulterior motives, vainly trying to use the hot-bloodedness and impulsiveness of young people to create chaos and destruction. Now tell me, what is your purpose in coming here today, and what do you want from me? Mia shrugged with a disdainful smile and said sarcastically, "Put away this boring game. If you really know me, then you should know who I'm working for. You should also know why Old Bernie suddenly started an all-out war. I only have one purpose in coming here today, and that is to give you and your subordinates an ultimatum. Either you kneel at the feet of my master and offer your loyalty, or you walk towards destruction like Pierre and those idiots. Now tell me, what is your choice?" Such a naked threat caused Kinkapard's expression to darken. However, he was very shrewd and didn't show any anger. He only narrowed his eyes and asked softly, "Is the energy wall outside your masterpiece? Purposely trapping Pierre's men in the upper city and watching them perish together with the underground guilds?" "That's right. My master hates all uncontrolled, chaotic, and highly destructive forces. Unfortunately, Pierre and his impulsive followers are one of them. There's also a lot of trash that needs to be cleaned up, including the remaining small groups that want to take advantage of the situation, as well as the ambitious gang leaders. All in all disturbances had to disappear completely within 2 days. His master hoped to see Valen City return to normal by the 3rd day. Everything had to be the same as when the pirate king Francis left. Of course, for those fellows who know how to restrain themselves and adapt to the circumstances, Master will not be stingy with rewards. Mia's words could be said to be both soft and hard. Not only did it contain a strong threat, but it also hinted that as long as the other side surrendered, they would be able to obtain benefits. As an assassin who had been engaged in intelligence theft, infiltration, and assassination for many years, she knew very well how to use her own advantages to divide, disintegrate, and win over the enemy from within. Reward? Humph. Don't take me for an ignorant idiot like Patty. Ken Coppet gave a cold laugh, and then crossed his fingers and rested his chin on his hands, his eyes flashing with an inexplicable light. After a few seconds, he seemed to have thought of something and immediately put on a smiling expression. "Tell me, if I choose to submit, what kind of benefits can I obtain? You should know that my subordinates and I are the best spies in the game. After so many years, we've only used less than 1/5 of the underground guild's manpower to complete more than double their intelligence gathering missions. You should understand our value. If the price is too low, please forgive me for not being able to answer to my subordinates." Haggling? The corners of Mia's mouth rose slightly, forming an almost imperceptible arc. "All right, since you want to talk about conditions, then let's talk about it." As she spoke, she walked gracefully to the table and suddenly transformed into her cat-human form. She grabbed the other party's neck, her sharp nails sticking close to his skin. With just a little bit of force, she would be able to tear apart his fragile neck. It was obvious that Ken Coppet hadn't expected this at all and couldn't react in time. Even a few rat men hidden in the shadows hurriedly rushed out, letting out threatening growls. However, Mia responded with a contemptuous smile and quickly said, "If you choose to submit, then you can keep your life. How about it? Isn't that fair? Even I can't stop you, and you still want to bargain with my master? Who gave you the courage to do so?" And who made you think you have the right to do so? Remember, don't overestimate your abilities, and don't try to bargain with someone who is countless times stronger than you. You can't bear the serious consequences. However, as the servant of a benevolent master, I've decided to give you some benefits. After all, we're in dire need of people now, and even a few more rats would be good. Faced with such naked humiliation, the ratmen's eyes began to turn red. Flames of anger rose rapidly in their bodies, and they couldn't wait to tear this damned woman in front of them into pieces. Fortunately, they had undergone strict training, and before their leader gave the order, no one dared to act rashly. Compared to his subordinates, Kin Kapid was much calmer. Not only did he not show any anger or fear, he even laughed happily. Ha 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 ha. Interesting, this is really interesting. I'm now more and more certain that you and your master must be in big trouble. Although you tried to establish a strong image from the beginning, you revealed a flaw in the end. If I were you, I definitely wouldn't recklessly use force to threaten you. Not only did it not have any effect, but it also exposed your urgent feelings and our value. Now let me down, and let's have a real honest talk. For example, why did the old leader choose to cooperate with you? And why did you assassinate him? Don't worry. I promise that as long as you answer my question seriously, I will continue to act according to the old leader's orders. There was no doubt that with his years of experience in the underworld, Kin Kapid saw through Mia's real situation and even turned himself from the passive party to the active party. Excluding his personal strength, in terms of ability alone, he was undoubtedly the most outstanding intelligence worker on the archipelago. Seeing that her plan had been seen through, Mia helplessly let go of her claws and took a few steps back. She cursed, "Damn it, you cunning old fox. All right, as you wish, let's talk. But before that, I have to warn you, it's best not to play any tricks. You may be smart, but in the face of absolute power, this little bit of cleverness is useless." Kin Kapid smiled and spread out his hands. "No problem. I know better than you how terrifying the power of those energy walls outside is. As long as you and your master are not the murderers of the old leader, I will definitely do what I say." Chapter 806. Some scholars had once said that most conflicts between people originated from the wrong interpretation of certain actions and words. As long as they sat down and communicated properly, they could avoid more than 70% of such situations. Even though Kinkapard and Mia were enemies to begin with, and there was no such thing as a misunderstanding between them, after calming down and exchanging some information, the former discovered that the latter wasn't the enemy he was looking for. The latter also felt that the former was very smart and wouldn't do anything stupid. Just like that, 10 minutes later, they reached out their right hands at the same time and held each other tightly. "I can trust you, right?" Mia asked as she licked her lips. Kinkapard nodded without batting an eyelid. "Of course. I promised that as long as you aren't the murderers of the old leader, I'll continue to fulfill my obligations as an ally. As for the rest, we'll talk about it after the dust settles. Lastly, I'll remind you to be careful of the shadows hidden in the depths of the darkness. According to the information I've gathered recently, I feel that something terrifying might happen in Valen City. No matter who it is, they were destined to be defeated the moment they chose to become enemies with our master. Remember these promises. You know the consequences if I find that they haven't been fulfilled." After leaving behind these harsh words, Mia turned around and started running at an extremely fast speed. She then leapt up and disappeared into a dark corner in the blink of an eye. Even the rat man with the best eyesight couldn't see where she'd left the warehouse. Orire was a highly skilled stealer. They could activate a portion of the magical energy stored in their body and connect themselves to the shadow plane. As their profession level increased, this connection would also become closer. It was said that legendary assassins could even pass through the cracks between the material world and the shadow plane at will. As long as there was even the slightest shadow within 100 meters of the warehouse, they could launch a fatal assassination. Of course, Mia was still very far away from this goal. Perhaps she wouldn't be able to do it in her entire life, but the stealthiness she displayed was indeed a little chilling. After all, not everyone could keep their nerves taut and be prepared for sudden situations. Many times, a careless distraction or negligence could lead to death in an instant. A slightly skinny rat man wrinkled his nose. After confirming that there was no longer Mia's scent in the air, he immediately came in front of Kinkapard and asked in a low voice, "Old friend, are you sure this woman's words are true? The old leader's death has nothing to do with them?" "Yes, I can confirm that she and her mysterious master are definitely not the murderers of the old leader. The reason is very simple. The sudden assassination of the old leader is also a disaster for them. Haven't you noticed that the powerful energy walls outside are to prevent possible large-scale riots? So from a certain perspective, not only do we not have any conflicts of interest with them, we even have a very close cooperation with them. Even though the old leader has never told anyone the details, judging from his previous actions, the cooperation should be going smoothly, and there is no reason for him to take the risk of assassinating us. Other than that, the werecat's teeth don't match the bite marks on the old leader's neck. I have reason to believe that they're not the murderers we're looking for." Ken Copped explained his analysis to his subordinates without missing a single detail. Ever since old Bernie died, he could no longer act arbitrarily like before. He had to do his best to unite all the forces that could be united to ensure that the entire intelligence system would not disintegrate due to various reasons. Otherwise, he himself would lose the value of his existence. The skinny rat orc was obviously not interested in this long speech. He glared with his two small black eyes and fiercely slammed the old wooden table, cursing through gritted teeth. "Bastard! Does that mean our leads are cut off again?" "No, it's not completely cut off yet. Don't forget, based on the height of the bite marks and the size of the teeth, we can deduce that the murderer is no taller than 2 meters, and the head is only 2/3 to half the size of a normal person's. I believe there aren't many people in Valen City who fit this description. Now, I order you to mobilize all of our forces in the lower city district and find this person. Let him or her taste the most extreme pain. No one can be safe after killing the old leader. No one." Ken Copped's expression became incomparably malevolent as the last word left his mouth. He didn't even react when his nails dug into his flesh. As an orphan who was raised by old Bernie like his own son, the sadness and anger in his heart were no less than Pierre's. However, after working in the intelligence field for a long time, he had become more mature, calm, and rational. He knew that the underground guild would never do such a stupid assassination. His goal was to uncover the real murderer, not just find a random scapegoat. "No problem. Don't worry. I promise to find a murderer within a day. No matter what, he has to accept our revenge. Taste the most extreme pain." As he spoke, the skinny rat man thumped his chest and turned to leave the warehouse through the back door. In a short 10 minutes, the entire Ratman intelligence network in the lower city district quickly moved, frantically searching for every suspicious target. But they had no idea that the real murderer had long since left the lower city district and was wandering alone near the only entrance to the Mage Tower. Pain and guilt tormented Portia's soul, and at the same time, she was dominated by her inner hunger and impulse. She wandered aimlessly between these two conflicting emotions, like a walking corpse. Only one thought reverberated in her mind, and that was Gillis Chundra's order. Vampires had absolute control over the descendants they created. Unless they released them on their own accord, even the gods couldn't sever this connection. Even though she had lost all rationality and was only acting on instinct and subconsciousness, Portia seemed to understand that she couldn't enter the Mage Tower without triggering the alarm. Thus, she silently hid in a dark corner, waiting for an opportunity to strike. Without a doubt, she had completely fallen into the dark side of human nature, and there was no possibility of redeeming herself. Even the halfling god of thieves no longer cared for his devout followers. Chapter 807. As everyone knew, faith was a two-way choice that couldn't be forced. Believers would choose a god who shared their beliefs as their patron, and the gods would similarly choose mortals whose actions were in line with their teachings as their followers. Although Bordia still believed in the god of thieves in the depths of her heart, her race and actions had seriously violated the teachings of this god. Therefore, it was normal for her to be abandoned. After repeated prayers and confessions went unanswered, she soon began to give up on herself. Her helpless curses slowly escalated to hatred from the bottom of her heart. Her whole person was quickly distorted from her mind to her body. In the end, there was only a dark fire burning fiercely that would never be extinguished. Like most of the undead, she was filled with extreme hatred for the living. Of course, there was also the master who controlled her thoughts and actions, Gilish Chandra. Just a few hours after the sun had set from the horizon, the snake-shaped mark connected to the wizard tower suddenly released a dark red light. Following that, a short-haired girl wearing a light blue apprentice robe appeared out of thin air. She looked around cautiously and quickly took out a quill. Dipping it in a special ink that she carried with her, she quickly wrote on the wall. In just a few seconds, she had written a long line of letters that emitted fluorescent light. However, the light emitted by these letters didn't last for long. In the blink of an eye, they disappeared without a trace, as if they had never appeared. The female apprentice was so focused that she didn't notice that a pair of scarlet eyes were staring at her from behind. Feeling the healthy and surging blood in the girl's body, Bordia gently stuck out her tongue and licked her lips. Suddenly, she stretched out her arm and forcefully strangled the female apprentice from behind. Cough! Cough, cough! Who is it? Let go! The pitiful apprentice struggled and twisted with all her might, even using her fingernails to scratch the arm around her neck. She wanted to escape from the danger before her eyes. Unfortunately, all her efforts were in vain. Putting aside the fact that a wizard's physique wasn't much stronger than an ordinary person's, just based on the vampire's powerful recovery ability, it was impossible for her to retreat from a mere scratch. In the end, due to the lack of oxygen, her struggles became weaker and weaker. Her eyes couldn't help but roll upwards. She would probably die in another half a minute. As an elite bandit, Bordia could easily determine a person's physiological state. Hence, she slightly relaxed her tense muscles. She then lowered her voice and threatened. I believe you already know my strength, girl. Now, I'll give you a chance to live. Tell me what you were doing and how to enter the mage tower. Remember, don't play any tricks. If I hear any sound coming from your throat, you will become a lifeless corpse in the next second. Huff, huff, huff. The apprentice, who finally had a chance to catch his breath, opened his mouth wide and desperately tried to breathe in the fresh air. At the same time, his whole body was trembling uncontrollably. He was obviously frightened to death. Although she had received some combat training in the mage tower, she was only 15 or 16 years old after all. She had completely broken down after nearly being killed. She cried and nodded desperately. Whoa, don't kill me. I'm just a lowly apprentice. Shut up. Answer the question. Idiot. Your life is like a maggot in my eyes. It has no value at all. Bordia said coldly and mercilessly. Perhaps if it was in the past, she would more or less take care of the girl's emotions. However, ever since she had tasted true pain and despair, she would no longer pity anyone. This was because she was now filled with the desire for revenge. She longed for more people to taste the same pain and despair as her. Human nature was complicated and full of all kinds of dark sides, especially the thought of not worrying about scarcity, but about inequality. It always existed in the hearts of more than 99% of people. It was like a demon that could make ordinary people fall into extreme madness at any time. If someone suddenly suffers a misfortune, the first thing they think about is not how to change, but how to make more people around them experience the same experience as themselves, so that they can understand each other and tolerate each other. Otherwise, they will have hatred in their hearts, such as why his life is so good, but mine is so bad, and so on. According to psychology, the more familiar and close people were, the higher the probability of similar situations occurring between them. Among them, jealousy was the main triggering factor. There was no doubt that the female apprentice's cowardice showed that she was well protected and had not experienced any real setbacks. This made the halfling, who had just tasted pain and despair, develop a strong sense of jealousy. Her eyes flashed with a bloodthirsty light, as if she could pounce on the girl and suck her blood dry at any time. The girl did not know how dangerous her situation was. She sobbed and replied in a small voice, "The incantation to enter the wizard tower is, knowledge opens the path of truth. As long as you say it to the mark, you will immediately be teleported into the tower." As for the letters, just now, they were the orders given by the tower master. I don't know what they mean. Knowledge opens the path of truth? This is really like your style? Bordia seemed to have recalled something. A trace of complex emotions flashed across her face, but it was quickly replaced by a ferocious expression. She suddenly pounced on the girl, opened her mouth, and bit the girl's neck. She greedily sucked the girl's sweet blood. In just a minute or so, she had sucked the girl's blood dry. The poor apprentice did not even have the chance to resist. Her two beautiful eyes were wide open, and she did not even know why she died. As the hot blood flowed in her body, Bordia once again felt that indescribable pleasure. She could not help but let out a soft moan. It took a full 5 minutes before it slowly subsided. She wiped the remaining blood from her mouth and said to the snake-shaped mark on the wall, "Knowledge opens the path of truth." In an instant, the snake-shaped mark on the stone suddenly released a golden radiance, and then quickly caved in, causing the surrounding stones to spin rapidly. In the blink of an eye, a tunnel leading to the underground was formed. Without any hesitation, she immediately turned into a gaseous state and slowly disappeared into the darkness. There was no need to ask. Bordia had only one purpose in entering the wizard tower, and that was to assassinate Andre and complete Gilish Chunder's orders. Perhaps to her, it did not matter whether this operation succeeded or failed. Anyway, she only had one goal left, and that was to get rid of this damn control, regardless of whether she died or not. Chapter 808. The Mage Tower was not as silent as most places in the city at night, nor would it be plunged into darkness due to the lack of lighting equipment. On the contrary, as most mages were a bunch of willful bastards who did not like to be restrained, they also did not have a sense of time. As long as they were in the mood for research, they would rely on drugs and spells to sustain themselves. It was normal for them to not sleep for days and nights. Therefore, day and night held no meaning to them, especially after Andre activated the magical energy wall that sealed off the entire city. All mages, apprentices, and servants were excitedly discussing the matter. Although they did not know what it meant, they all expressed their strong support for it without exception. It was just like how most ordinary people like to support leaders who were tough on the outside, even if that leader might start a war and drag everyone into hell. Perhaps it was because the underground Mage Tower had never been invaded since its construction, so no one noticed a cloud of white mist silently passing through the corridor. Even the magical golems that never rested merely glanced at it in confusion before continuing to guard their posts. With their low intelligence, they could only passively defend against those intruders with forms. As for why a cloud of mist could move on its own, there was no way for them to make a judgment. Although Portia's infiltration was very smooth, so much so that it could not be any simpler, it did not seem like the reaction of a heavily guarded mage tower at all. However, she did not let her guard down at all. After passing through another corridor, she suddenly stopped and slowly returned to her physical form. She silently followed behind an apprentice who was about to pass through the booby-trap floor. As a veteran thief, she could see the fatal spell hidden under the floor in front of her at a glance. If anyone tried to fly over or step on the wrong spot, they would probably not even leave a complete corpse behind. Without a doubt, this was a passage specially designed to prevent invisibility, shape-shifting, spirit body, stealth, and so on. Unless one could decipher the constantly changing password on the wall, it was impossible to walk through alive. The young apprentice, who looked to be in his early 20s, was racking his brains and concentrating on deciphering the password. He was completely unaware of the deadly Grim Reaper behind him. After a full 5 minutes, He seemed to have thought of something and stepped on a floor engraved with letters with his left foot. Then he stepped on another floor. In just a few seconds, he had passed through a corridor that was 20 meters long. If one looked closely, they would notice that the letters he had stepped on just happened to spell out a word in the common language, which was fire. It was the correct answer to the password that appeared on the wall. In fact, such a trap floor was set up in many spellcasters' organizations. Not only could it prevent foreign enemies from invading, but it could also stimulate the minds of internal members. It was killing two birds with one stone. Just as the young man successfully passed through the trap floor, he did not even have time to catch his breath. Portia moved like a shadow. She launched an attack from the side in the blink of an eye. Her fist, which was only half the size of a human, was like an iron hammer, ruthlessly hitting the throat. Her speed was fast and accurate. The poor victim didn't even have time to react before he fell to the ground. He covered his wound and coughed violently. The pain was so great that the skin on his face and neck turned purplish red. Seizing the short span of 2 seconds, Portia circled around to the front and grabbed the young man's hair. Baring her 2 fangs menacingly, she growled in a low voice, "Look into my eyes." VV, vampire. Naturally, anyone who could become a senior wizard apprentice would not be an idiot. Thus, the young man immediately recognized the obvious characteristics of an undead creature from the other party's eyes, teeth, and skin temperature. The hair all over his body stood up uncontrollably. However, whether it was because his throat had suffered a heavy blow or because he was afraid of being silenced, he did not choose to call for help immediately. Instead, he cooperated and looked into the pair of scarlet eyes. That's right, just like that. Look into my eyes. The corners of Portia's mouth curled up slightly into a sinister smile. A layer of magical halo quickly shot out from her eyes as she forcefully imbued her will into the young man's brain. The young man only felt a buzzing sound in his head. Soon, his pupils slowly dilated and his consciousness became more and more blurry. Finally, he fell into a semi-drowsy state. Upon noticing this, Portia licked her lips and said softly, "Good. Very good. Just like that. Now tell me, who are you? And who am I? I am Cherry Aston, a senior wizard apprentice. You are my supreme master." As the young man stupidly uttered these words, his entire body immediately began to tremble nonstop. A few seconds later, he returned to normal. Apart from his eyes being filled with fanatical worship for the halfling, everything else about him was no different from before. What a good child. Now, bring me to the room on the top floor. Seeing that the young man was completely under her control, Portia let out a burst of incomprehensible laughter. She knew very well that the young man's will have been crushed by the gaze just now. Just like a control spell, as long as he was not more than 9 meters tall, it would not be a problem even if she wanted him to kill his family and loved ones. This was the special ability of vampires, domination. Any target that was crushed during the gaze process would be treated as if a level 12 wizard or warlock had cast a level 5 arcane spell, dominate human. For most people, it was simply impossible to break free from the control. As you wish, honorable master. However, please be careful. The golem upstairs does not recognize you, so once it discovers you, it will immediately trigger the alarm in the tower. Saying this, the young man stood up and bowed deeply with one hand on his chest. He then turned and walked towards the central control room. In his eyes, the halfling and the vampire had become his closest and most trustworthy family and friends apart from himself. Don't worry, you just need to lead the way. I'll take care of the rest myself. As the last word left her mouth, Portia once again transformed into a spiritual state and attached herself to the young man's back. As the time she spent as a vampire grew longer, she became more and more proficient in the use of her abilities. A certain trait hidden in her body was also slowly being activated. Soon, under the guidance of the thief, the two of them passed through all the traps in the tower and appeared at the staircase on the top floor. The golem guarding here immediately woke up and asked in a low, muffled voice, "Halt. State your name and purpose. Chapter 809. I'm Cherry Aston. I'm here on Master Angus' orders to inform you of a very important matter. The young man obviously knew that golems were usually very rigid and would not accept any verbal or logical deception, so he simply made up a reason. After all, his goal was to enter the central control room and not foolishly clash with the same rock. Thus, he just had to be careful and go around it. Cherry Aston? The golem's gem-like eyes flashed as it muttered to itself, searching. Cherry Aston, 5-year veteran apprentice, master of Wizard Jacob. Identity approved. After confirming the identity of the visitor, it did not let him in immediately. Instead, it waved its thick arms and turned around and knocked on the door. Asterisk bang, bang, bang. Asterisk, master. Apprentice Cherry Aston says that he's here on Master Angus' orders to inform you of an important matter. Andre, who was immersed in deciphering the profound knowledge in the scroll, was slightly stunned when he heard the golem's voice. He did not immediately respond. He, who had always been cautious, subconsciously sensed that something was wrong. Angus was a diligent and serious person, and he would always come personally whenever he encountered a major problem. He would never let an unrelated apprentice participate in it. To confirm this, Andre immediately cast a level 0 spell, Communication. As a white arcane light flashed, he began to ask softly, Angus, you're looking for me? I'm looking for you. When? Why don't I know? The bald wizard hurriedly stopped his experiment and asked inexplicably through the spell. As expected, there's a problem. The corner of Andre's mouth curled up slightly, revealing a hint of playfulness. He quickly replied, It's nothing. An apprentice called Cherry Aston says that he's here on your orders to inform me of an important matter. Cherry Aston? Angus immediately frowned, his brain quickly searching for relevant information. He's one of the few veteran apprentices in the tower. According to his learning progress, he could become an official wizard in a few months. Why would there be a problem at this time? Could he be a spy planted by a certain faction? I don't know if he's a spy or not, but it doesn't matter. We'll find out soon enough. After all, he's just an apprentice. Let's hear what he has to say first. With that, Andre carefully put the scroll away and shouted at the golem outside the door, Let him in. As you wish. After the golem received the order, it immediately moved aside and made a gesture of invitation with its huge body blocking the staircase. Acolyte, you may enter now. Thank you very much. Even though the young man knew that the big guy in front of him had low intelligence and could not understand the complicated emotions of humans, he still bowed slightly. After all, to him, who was born in a declining noble family, etiquette was like eating, drinking, and breathing. It had become a habit and an instinct that existed in his subconscious. No matter who the other party was, he would behave in this way. This was both a disguise and self-protection. Unfortunately, the golem did not react at all. It stood there motionless, once again falling into silence, as if it was a lifeless rock. The young man smiled and shrugged his shoulders. He quickly stepped forward and pushed open the door to enter the core of the wizard tower, the central control room. As soon as he entered, he saw Andre sitting in front of the desk. He quickly stepped forward and greeted him. Good evening, respected tower master. Good evening, acolyte. Tell me, why have you come to find me? Or why is the white fog following behind you looking for me? Andre stroked his chin, sneering as he stared at the white fog that was trying to hide him. As a wizard who had fought against vampires not long ago, he would not forget the innate ability of his enemy so quickly. Realizing that his whereabouts had been exposed, the young man did not show the slightest bit of panic. Instead, he smiled and suddenly pulled out a handful of white wool from his bosom, chanting loudly, Shrek. The white wool immediately turned into a silver halo, exploding in the air with a bang. Invisible energy spread out in all directions at a speed faster than the speed of sound. Although in the eyes of a truly powerful spellcaster, this was no more than a simple level 0 spell, stun spell. However, simple spells could also play an unexpected role at the right time. Just as the young man thought he was about to succeed, Andre suddenly stretched out a finger and gently tapped the air. An identical spell shot out from his fingertips. Whether it was the structure of the spell or the strength of the energy, everything was exactly the same. It perfectly offset the effects of the stun spell. How? How is this possible? The young man could not believe what he was seeing. He cried out in shock. If this was a defensive spell, then he would not be surprised at all. This was because he knew from the beginning that the Tower Master in front of him, who looked to be only 15 or 16 years old, was in fact a mage of a much higher level than himself. It would not be difficult for him to defend against a mere stun spell. However, what surprised him was that the other party did not choose to activate a defensive spell. Instead, he copied and simulated everything that happened in the instant when the spell was cast. It must be known that in terms of difficulty, these were two completely different concepts. The latter only relied on a higher level of a mage to destroy the offensive spell, while the former required an unimaginable precision of magic control. In less than a second, a careful calculation was completed and offset the energy surging towards one's body. Even among the great mages, there were very few who could do this. Looking at the young man's eyes that were filled with disbelief, Andre smiled and asked, "Impossible? Why is it impossible? You should know that magic itself uses one's own magic to trigger the resonance of the magic energy in the surrounding air. Although most of the time it is very difficult to control because of the uneven distribution, but this is a mage tower. The concentration of every cubic meter of air has been strictly distributed. Well, step aside, apprentice. I'm not interested in playing these boring games now. Let the guy behind you come out, or I don't mind filling the whole room with positive energy." In fact, this method of precise control of magic energy was something he had just learned from the scroll. According to the description in the scroll, the first thing to learn in order to create an intelligent life with independent thoughts was to learn precise control of magic energy. This was to ensure that every inch of the body of the creation was carefully sculpted. In particular, there must not be any mistakes in the creation of the soul. Otherwise, it would only be a defective product with huge flaws. Chapter 8:10. The young apprentice seemed to be intimidated, and a hesitant expression appeared on his face. On one hand, he was afraid of Andre's terrifying spellcasting ability, as well as his unbelievable control over magic power. On the other hand, he did not want to embarrass himself in front of his master. After all, the effect of the dominate human spell was to make the target view the spellcaster as their closest kin, not to deprive the target of their ability to think. Therefore, when they encountered an enemy that they could not defeat, it was entirely possible for them to turn around and flee. Just as the young man's will became more and more conflicted, the white fog that had been hiding behind him all this time slowly condensed into a solid form in the shadows. With the help of the refraction of light as cover, it did not attract anyone's attention. At this moment, Borsch's excellent physique as a vampire and the thief's innate talent in concealment were perfectly molded and fused together. She was like a natural-born Darkwalker, not revealing the slightest bit of murderous intent from the beginning. Without a doubt, she had successfully used the young man to attract Andre's attention. She quietly moved along the circular stone pillar on the inner side of the wall and circled to the blind spot behind it. One of her hands was firmly pressed on the throwing dagger hanging from her waist, while the other hand reached in her pocket filled with all kinds of gadgets. Someone once said that a thief's battle was the art of sneak attacks and traps. As long as one could fully utilize their stealth and the tools they carried with them, even a great wizard could fail miserably. Before Andre discovered her, Borscha quickly took out an extremely thin steel wire and gently tied it to the pull ring on the side of the stone pillar. The other end was tied to the dagger, and she inserted it into the partition on the side of the bookshelf. In just a few seconds, she had created a dangerous cutting trap. Anyone who was not careful enough would immediately have their throats slit by the steel wire that could not be seen by the naked eye. If one thought that this was the standard of an experienced thief, they would be sorely mistaken. In less than a minute, Borsha quickly set up poisonous smoke traps, tripping locks, irritating powder, and so on. Finally, she even sprinkled a large handful of soybeans on the ground. When everything was ready, she took a deep breath and suddenly threw out 3 throwing daggers. Then, she once again slipped into the shadows. Under the dim light, the sharp blade reflected a chilling light as it went straight for the back of Andre's head, neck, and heart. They were so accurate and fast that even one of them would be enough to kill the target. However, just as the flying dagger was about to touch his skin, Andre suddenly turned his head without warning. He ignored the threat that was close at hand and teased with a smile. As a guest, it's not polite to treat the host like this. Also, do you really think that a sneak attack of this level can kill me? This is the Mage Tower, and the most important room in the Mage Tower. Even a mosquito will automatically form a magical defense if it comes within 2 meters of me. For example, as soon as his voice fell, he raised his hand and snapped his fingers. In the blink of an eye, an invisible energy field quickly spread out. The 3 flying daggers were suspended in the air as if they had been installed on a wall, unable to approach even half an inch. Look, this is an extremely simple level 2 spell. It will block all long-range weapons, including bows, crossbows, darts, throwing daggers, catapults, and so on. After saying that, Andre purposely paused for a moment. He narrowed his eyes and swept his gaze across the dark corners of the room, the corners of his mouth curling up. Come out, stop hiding, because it's meaningless. I have at least 10 ways to eliminate invisibility. Isn't it better to reduce the trouble a little? Unfortunately, Portia, who was hiding in the darkness, completely ignored him. She continued with her original plan, silently smearing a lethal poison on the dagger and steel wire. Just as Andre was starting to get impatient, the young apprentice who had been standing in the same spot all this, while suddenly took out a dark green bottle from his pocket and smashed it on the ground. Asterisk crack. Asterisk accompanied by the crisp sound of glass shattering. The gas in the bottle emitted a nauseating smell. It smelled like aged bricks in a cesspool. It was indescribable. As the instigator, the young apprentice was the first to be hit. He fell to the ground with a plop, his entire body convulsing nonstop. He even vomited in large mouthfuls. As the underground wizard tower was designed to be sealed, there was only a small ventilation hole in every room. It was impossible to expel a large amount of the stench in a short period of time, even if he used the wind creation spell. Seeing the green smoke getting closer and closer to him, Andre did not show any signs of panic. Instead, he laughed heartily and clapped his hands. Asterisk clap, 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 clap. Asterisk excellent. What a brilliant tactic. Apprentice, your performance today is a breath of fresh air. If you were as smart and decisive as you are usually, I think you would be promoted and put in an important position soon. Without a doubt, the young man's actions were all hinted at by Portia. Her goal was simple, and that was to force Andre to continuously retreat and reduce the space he could move in. It would be best if he stepped on a soybean and directly walked into the trap. It had to be said that the success rate of this plan that she came up with on the spot was very high. Normally, with the slow reflexes of a wizard, as well as the ability to maintain their balance, they would basically be doomed as long as they fell into the trap. A wizard who was caught off guard would not have the time to make complicated gestures, let alone chant an incantation without missing a single word. However, Andre was no ordinary wizard. Before the stench of the smoke had spread to within a meter of him, he raised his arm and extended a finger, gently sliding it in the air. In just a few seconds, a layer of milky white cold air enveloped all the stench that surged over, slowly condensing it back into a liquid state. In the end, most of the gas did not have time to evaporate and was once again stored in the ice bucket. It was common knowledge that all volatile liquids in the world had the same characteristic. That was, if the temperature dropped rapidly, the rate of evaporation would become very slow and even return from a gaseous state to a liquid state. Andre only used a simple freezing spell to easily dissolve his opponent's attack. As the saying went, Rich knowledge could make seemingly unsolvable problems simple, especially in a world like Orion where the transmission of information was very slow. His existence was cheating and extremely unreasonable. This was because while ordinary people were still having a headache over small problems, he had already begun to think about how to make himself stronger quickly. Chapter 8:11. In just a few minutes, Andre and Borsha had completed 2 intense exchanges of blows. Although on the surface, it was not as exciting as a direct confrontation between a warrior or a knight, nor was it as colorful as a duel between 2 spellcasters. Andre and Borsha had completed 2 intense exchanges of blows. However, only an expert could understand. They had perfectly displayed the characteristics and techniques of their respective professions, especially the latter's sneak attacks and traps, which could be called art. Just as described in the stories of the bards, a true thief would never fight the enemy head-on. If they missed, they would immediately disappear from the enemy's sight. You wouldn't even know where the next sneak attack would come from. What was even more frightening was that it was impossible for a person to remain in a state of mental tension. Once they lost focus, they could suffer a fatal attack in the next second. After completely freezing most of the foul-smelling liquid, Andre casually threw the lump of ice to one side and stood quietly in place. He didn't pursue the victory, nor did he try to use spells to find the enemy hidden in the darkness. He merely glanced at the half-unconscious young apprentice on the ground, and seemed to have sensed something. Silence, a deathly stillness, enveloped the entire room, as if everything that had just happened was an illusion. Hiding in the shadows in the corner, Borsha resisted the violent impulse deep in her heart and curled up motionlessly, waiting for the next opportunity to appear. She had seen with her own eyes how Andre used his wisdom and magic to toy with the weapon master Sam in the palm of his hand. She had also seen how Andre used the fireball wand to blast the elite night owl of the Underground Union into a charred corpse. It could be said that among all the people she knew, there was no one more terrifying and revered than Andre, especially as an enemy. As vampires were undead creatures, Borsha didn't need to breathe, nor did she have the so-called body temperature. As long as she didn't act rashly, the chances of being discovered were basically zero. However, just because she didn't move didn't mean that Andre didn't move. After a full 3 minutes, Andre suddenly bent down and picked up a throwing knife that had fallen on the ground. He muttered to himself, "To be honest, this scene in front of me is too shocking. Why didn't I think of it earlier?" Although old Bernie was so old that he was about to enter his coffin, he was still a warrior with decent strength. How could he have been so easily approached by others? Moreover, his face still had a calm expression after his death. There was only one reason, and that was that he definitely knew the person who launched the attack, and they were even very familiar with each other. Do you think my deduction is correct, my dear Portia? With that, Andre suddenly turned around, raised his hand, and threw the knife in his hand to the corner behind the bookshelf. As a half-human, half-elemental with night vision, a little bit of darkness couldn't stop his eyes. From the moment the halfling threw the dagger, he had already locked onto his opponent's position. However, because of the hood, he couldn't see his face clearly. Seeing that her hiding place had been discovered, Portia dodged the sharp, flying daggers without saying a word. She took off her gray hood and slowly walked out of the darkness. As she walked, she replied in a low and hoarse voice, "That's right, it's me. I killed my best friend with my own hands, and now I want to kill you. However, you're obviously smarter than that old bastard, and you're also very cautious. From the beginning to the end, you didn't reveal the slightest flaw. Before he died, that old bastard said that I had become a monster. But in my opinion, you're the real monster." "Monster? Ha ha. Can I take that as a compliment?" Andre asked as he looked at the pale skin on the halfling's face and neck, as well as the 2 fangs that were slightly protruding from the corner of his mouth. He didn't look nervous at all. Instead, he laughed heartily as if he had seen an old friend. "Compliment?" Portia laughed self-deprecatingly, followed by a helpless and bitter sigh. "Sigh? If you think so, then so be it. It's useless to say this now. Between you and me, only one can survive today. Based on the current situation, your chances of survival are higher. The Wizard Tower was a mage's home, sanctuary, research center, and fortress. She had heard this phrase many times before and was very clear on what fighting in the Wizard Tower meant to her. In fact, from the moment she entered the room, she only had one chance to make a move. Failure meant death. Looking at the halfling's scarlet eyes, Andre picked up a bottle of honey wine from the wine cabinet and threw it over. Catch. Drink some. It will make you feel better. Also, if you're not in a hurry, I think we can sit down and talk. I know your heart must be in pain, filled with hatred and despair. You yearn for eternal release, whether that release is death or complete depravity. But as a friend, I have the obligation to remind you that you don't have to follow the script set by Giles and Chandroni. I can provide you with a better choice. No, you can't help me. No one in this world can help me. Even God has abandoned me. If you really want to help me, then kill me, and then kill Giles. He's a demon, a real demon. Saying this, Portia unscrewed the cork and raised her head to gulp down the extremely strong honey wine, as if she was using alcohol to numb herself. Seeing the halfling give up on herself, Andre shook his head helplessly. He knew that this was an extremely clever psychological tactic used by the enemy. It made the victim feel isolated and helpless, and in the end, become sick and crazy in despair. What was even more frightening was that such a serious psychological problem couldn't be solved with magic or divine spells. The victim had to be resilient enough to walk out of the huge psychological shadow. Otherwise, they might as well die immediately. The bottle of wine was quickly emptied by Portia, but due to her vampire physique, she didn't show any signs of being drunk. After casually smashing the bottle against the wall, she drew her dagger without a word and got into a battle stance. Come, let's end this quickly. End? I think it would be more appropriate to call it suicide. Andre calmly took a few steps back and maintained a relatively safe distance. He wasn't an idiot. How could he not see that Portia was seeking a quick death? Apart from real demons and lunatics, no one liked to kill people for no reason, especially their close friends. At the very least, Andre didn't want to stain his hands with the blood of his friends. From the moment he recognized the halfling, he planned to kill. Chapter 8:12. It was obvious that a direct confrontation with a wizard in his wizard tower was no different from suicide, especially for a thief like Portia, who wasn't adept at fighting. Thieves were the general name of a certain profession. Categorizing it in detail, there were assassins who were adept at concealment and assassination, bounty hunters who were adept at tracking and trapping, and shadow dancers who were closely linked to the shadow world through mysterious magical rituals. In short, the ancient and basic profession of thieves could be branched into dozens of unique branches according to their learning and development. Thieves were one of them that leaned towards scouting and exploration, and combat wasn't their forte. Portia undoubtedly understood this point, and also knew that the current distance wasn't suitable for her to launch an attack. However, she didn't want to wait any longer. To be precise, she couldn't continue controlling the intense urge to kill in her mind. Her eyes sometimes struggled, sometimes turned vicious, and her hands couldn't help but tremble slightly. Like all newborn vampires, Portia's mind was always in a state of chaos and disorder. On one hand, she yearned to maintain her rationality and humanity, suppressing her lust for blood to the greatest extent. On the other hand, she had to obey her master's absolute control, doing countless things that went against her own will. Under such double torture, her self-control became weaker and weaker, and her nerves became more and more sensitive. She couldn't even control her emotions now, and the slightest provocation would cause her to overreact. Andre undoubtedly noticed this. His hands drooped slightly, and he tried his best not to make any threatening movements. He then gently consoled her. Calm down, my dear friend. You have to learn to control yourself and suppress the consciousness that Gil's deliberately instilled in your mind. In fact, he isn't as terrifying as you imagine, and he isn't as strong as he appears. Otherwise, he wouldn't have plotted for so many years to seize the Wizard Tower. Please believe me, I have the ability to resolve your current pain, and I also have the ability to make Gilles pay for his actions. Just as Andre was trying his best to avoid a fight, the strings in Borcia's mind suddenly snapped. She stomped on the ground, and her entire body flew over like a cannonball. Her speed was simply unimaginable. Fortunately, out of caution, Andre had kept a safe distance in advance. It was this distance that bought him 2 seconds of time. After 2 short incantations, his body was instantly covered with a layer of grayish-white stone skin. Needless to say, it was the stone skin spell used to defend against physical attacks. Just as the spell was about to take effect, Portia pounced forward, waving her magic dagger and stabbing it into the rock. At the same time, she opened her mouth and bit the area near the neck, tearing off a large amount of stone skin. Andre, who had been through many battles, did not care about the halfling hanging on his body. He closed his eyes and quickly chanted a spell because he knew that with the current strength of the attack, it would take at least half a minute to break through the defense, so there was no need to panic. 10 seconds passed in the blink of an eye. Seeing that the layer of stone covering the skin was about to be exhausted, Andre finally completed the level 5 transformation spell, Malicious Transfiguration. He raised his right hand and grabbed the halfling's neck, forcibly channeling a large amount of magical energy into her body. Even though Portia resisted with all her might, her resistance ultimately failed under the continuous flickering of the dark green arcane light. She slowly began to shrink, and in the blink of an eye, she turned into a harmless little white rabbit. Although this rabbit looked a little sinister, terrifying, and aggressive, a rabbit was still a rabbit. Even if she was bitten, she would not suffer too much damage. After doing all this, Andre grabbed the rabbit by the ear and threw it directly into a glass container. He then covered it with a lid with an air vent and completely sealed it. As the effects of the Malicious Transfiguration spell were permanent, there was no need to worry about the halfling coming out to cause trouble before the spell was dispelled. As for the rest, he would deal with it after dealing with Gilles. After all, if he did not get rid of this fellow, Portia would never be able to break free from his control, let alone regain her consciousness and rationality. Looking at the little white rabbit bumping around in the glass container, Andre smiled apologetically and explained softly, "I'm sorry, my little friend. I'll have to trouble you to wait patiently in there for a few days. Once the dust has settled, I'll definitely let you out." Goo-goo-goo-goo. Portia, who had turned into a rabbit, bared her teeth and let out a series of low cries, as if venting her anger and dissatisfaction. But unfortunately, Andre completely ignored it. He grabbed a piece of black cloth and covered it. He then turned around and went to the unconscious acolyte, kicking him a few times. "Oh, damn it. It hurts." The young acolyte quickly opened his eyes and groaned. His brain was obviously not working well due to the stench just now. He crawled up from the ground with great difficulty, rubbing his swollen forehead while muttering to himself, "Where am I? No, that's not right. I think I'm being controlled by a spell. Heavens, I seem to remember that I've done something stupid. That's right, acolyte. You've indeed been controlled by a spell. You've even attacked me twice," Andre reminded him expressionlessly. The acolyte was instantly shocked. He hurriedly turned around and bowed in a panic, stuttering as he explained, I'm really sorry, esteemed Tower Master. I was controlled by a vampire just now. That wasn't my intention. Please believe me." Andre stroked his chin, a hint of playfulness on his face. "Of course, I know that you've been controlled by a spell. Otherwise, do you think you'd still be alive? Thank you for your kindness. Don't worry, I promise there won't be a next time." As a veteran acolyte, Chester Aston was naturally not an idiot. When he realized that Andre had no intention of blaming him, he immediately went along with the flow and tried to escape punishment. After all, it was a very serious matter for an acolyte to attack an official wizard. It was so serious that he might be subjected to inhumane treatment, such as becoming a lab rat for some dangerous magical experiments. Looking at the young man's eyes that flickered with guilt, the corners of Andre's mouth curled up slightly. He extended a finger and shook it lightly. No, acolyte. The reason I didn't kill you wasn't because I was being merciful. Instead, it was because you displayed extraordinary talent when you attacked. I'll give you a chance now. Use the most effective method to attack me. I want to see if you're worthy of my forgiveness. Chapter 8:13. To Andre, there were only two types of people in this world. One was his family and friends, while the other was strangers. Strangers were further divided into two types. One was useful to him, while the other was useless. It was obvious that in his eyes, Chester Aston was one of the more valuable strangers. Otherwise, he wouldn't have wasted his precious time on him. The young apprentice's hands trembled slightly, as if he could feel Andre's unwavering will and his cold and merciless heart. He instantly realized that he had no other choice. If he could not perform to Leyland's satisfaction, then the consequences would definitely be beyond what he could bear. Hurry up, apprentice. My time and patience are limited. I don't have the time to waste with you here. If you don't do anything after 10 seconds, I'll take it that you've given up on this opportunity. Noticing that the young man was still hesitating and struggling, Andre immediately urged him with an expressionless face. What he desired was an apprentice who had a clear mind, quick thinking, knew how to use simple tactics, and had a certain amount of potential that was worth the effort to nurture, not a cowardly idiot who only knew how to obey orders. As you wish, esteemed Tower Master. Seeing that he could not avoid this calamity, Chester Aston could only brace himself and bow. He then quickly took out a bottle of potion that shone with a golden radiance and drank it. When the potion flowed down his esophagus and into his stomach, a powerful magical energy instantly surged from his body. Judging by its intensity, he had already reached the level of an official mage. Without a doubt, he had used a potion that could temporarily raise his spell casting level in an attempt to minimize the gap in strength between the two of them. When the chaotic and violent magical energy stabilized, the young man quickly opened his spell book. At the same time, he took out a small handful of fine sand from his spell-casting material bag and began to chant an incantation loudly. In just a few short seconds, he had activated the spell recorded in the spellbook. Silver-white radiance continuously bloomed on his fingertips. Finally, he aimed straight ahead and pointed lightly. All the silver-white radiance began to revolve around Andre. As the speed of the revolutions increased, he felt a strong sense of drowsiness assaulting him. His eyes grew heavier and heavier, as if there was a voice in his head urging him to sleep. Sleep! Sleep! Just as his consciousness was gradually fading away, Chester Aston quickly took out the dagger he carried with him and pounced on him, ruthlessly stabbing at the spot where Portia had attacked in a frenzy. He was very clear that under the protection of the stone skin technique, it was impossible for him to create a fatal wound. He only needed to scratch the skin a little. Unfortunately, even though Andre's stone skin was only left with a thin layer, it wasn't something that could be pierced by a dagger and a frail mage's strength. With a loud bang, stone chips flew everywhere. The last layer of stone perfectly blocked the dagger, causing the young man's carefully planned attack to go down the drain. Helplessly, he could only retreat quickly and spread out his hands with a bitter smile. I'm sorry, Tower Master. I've done my best. I've even activated the level 1 spell stored in the spellbook, Hypnosis. I sincerely hope that I didn't disappoint you. Andre, who was no longer sleepy, lowered his head and glanced at the position where the dagger was stuck. A trace of surprise quickly appeared on his face before he nodded in satisfaction. Not bad. To be exact, not bad at all. You've displayed extraordinary intelligence, and your understanding of spells and tactical coordination is far superior to that of ordinary acolytes. After all, most apprentices preferred to pursue powerful offensive spells or defensive spells that could make themselves invulnerable. Very few of them noticed that the true value of a mage lay in their ability to control spells. Even though hypnosis isn't all that remarkable among level 1 arcane spells, once successfully cast, it can cause the target to fall into a deep sleep. When that happens, all it takes is a dagger or a poisoned arrow to easily kill the enemy. I'm very happy that there's still such an outstanding acolyte in the Wizard Tower. It looks like your previous performance wasn't just a flash in the pan. As a reward for your outstanding performance, I've decided to forgive you and give you a chance." Hearing that he could finally escape punishment, Chester Aston instantly heaved a sigh of relief. He wiped the sweat off his forehead with his sleeve and asked carefully, "May I ask, what is the chance you're referring to?" "It's simple. You should know that Angus is currently in charge of the operation of the entire Mage Tower. Although I trust him a lot, for the sake of safety, I still need an informant to keep an eye on him and report his every move to me. How about it? Do you want to give it a try? Of course, as a reward, you can borrow more than 90% of the books in the library for free. At the same time, you'll also receive some magic scrolls, materials, and more energy rations depending on the importance of the content you report." In order to incite the demon known as greed in the other party's heart, Andre purposely offered extremely generous conditions. After all, as a superior, he couldn't possibly trust a subordinate who had just joined him without any reservations, and it was even more impossible for him to not take any precautions. The youth before him was the spy he intended to plant here. Chester Aston wasn't an idiot. He instantly understood that Leyland wanted him to be a spy, and the person he was monitoring was a powerful advanced mage. Once exposed, the consequences would be worse than death. However, there was a saying that the risk and reward were always proportional. If one wanted to obtain more and better resources, they would naturally have to bear greater risks. After much consideration, the youth took a deep breath and quickly knelt on one knee, bowing deeply. "Your will is my command. From today onwards, I will be your eyes and ears. No matter what you wish to know, I will report it to you truthfully." Seeing that he had achieved his goal, the corners of Andre's mouth rose slightly. He smiled and nodded. "I like smart people, especially smart people like you who know when to advance and when to retreat. Do your job well. As long as you don't betray me, I guarantee you a bright future." "Thank you very much. I swear that I won't betray you in the slightest." Chester Aston bowed again, displaying an extraordinary humility and obedience. Just as Andre was about to say a few more words of encouragement, the door to the central control room was suddenly pushed open with a bang. Angus hurriedly barged in. He didn't even pay attention to the young apprentice standing to the side, reporting with a grave expression, "Sir, something bad has happened. Our personnel on duty have detected a fully armed fleet heading toward Valen City. They will reach the harbor in at most half an hour." "A fleet?" Andre's expression changed drastically. He immediately asked, "Did you see who they are? What flag are they flying? How many are there? Has the pirate King Francis returned?" Chapter 814. Angus clearly understood the seriousness of the situation. He pondered for a few seconds before quickly replying, "My apologies, sir. Due to the darkness of the sky, we were unable to observe the people on the deck. As for the flag, the other party didn't seem to want to be recognized, so they didn't hang any flags. Even the sails were painted pure black. But judging from the style and number of ships, it shouldn't be Pirate King Francis fleet, because they don't show any signs of having participated in battle. Moreover, one of the ships is especially large, a style I've never seen before." "A style I've never seen before?" Andre narrowed his eyes, as if recalling something. He immediately mobilized the detection ability of the Wizard Tower and projected the images he observed onto the mirror. Instantly, a scene of surging waves appeared in front of him. On the pitch-black surface of the sea, a dozen or so ships were braving the wind and waves. Among them were modified armed merchant ships, as well as real warships. But the most conspicuous one was undoubtedly the giant ship at the very front. It was over 40 meters long and 14 meters wide, with 3 towering masts covered in sails. In terms of size alone, it was at least 3 to 4 times the size of the ships behind it. More importantly, the deck reflected a touch of gold under the moonlight. Although it wasn't very obvious, it was enough to determine the name of the ship, Eye of Arcane. As the builder, how could Andre forget this giant ship that once carried his dreams of sailing? especially after seeing it repaired and once again galloping on the sea. A smile quickly appeared on his face. Angus, who was adept at observing people's expressions, caught this and hurriedly asked in a soft voice, "Sir, may I ask if you already know the origin of this unfamiliar fleet?" Andre nodded and replied, of course I know. Don't worry, not only are they not the enemy, but they're also reinforcements. With their addition, we can clean up Valen City from top to bottom in advance. You should know that I've always wanted to uproot the fortress at the highest point of the city. That location is too important. As long as the pirate beacon towers there are left, Francis might be able to learn of the situation in the city in advance. Once he's prepared, it'll be difficult to annihilate the pirates in one go. Reinforcements? With all due respect, are you 100% sure? Angus frowned subconsciously, his tone full of doubt. He couldn't be blamed for being cautious. After all, he had no idea that the entire Valen City had been taken over by a legend lich. Not to mention a mere fleet. Even if all the ships in the southern seas were gathered together, it wouldn't be a big deal. In any case, there were many powerful magic spells that could raise monstrous waves and bury all the wooden ships. Yes, I'm 100% sure, because the largest ship in the picture was personally made by me. It has powerful weapons on it, and it can be used to storm the castle. All right, leave this matter to me. You just need to be responsible for providing support. If you need the power of the Mage Tower, I'll let you know. After saying that, Andre waved his hand, indicating that the question was over. He didn't want others to know too many of his secrets, nor did he want to explain his identity and status in Linden City. Angus wasn't a fool. He understood that he couldn't continue probing, or else he might anger the other party. Thus, he immediately placed one hand on his chest and bowed slightly. Understood. Please be careful. I'll await your order to attack at any time. Seeing that the bald mage was so tactful, Andre revealed a satisfied smile. Very good. Have the guards continue to pay attention to the movements in the surroundings. Inform me immediately if they discover anything. Oh, right. I've already found out that the apprentice Chester Aston was under the influence of magic just now. You can stop investigating and suspecting him. Understood. Angus answered neatly. While he was speaking, he glanced at the young apprentice standing to the side out of the corner of his eye, his gaze full of doubt. Even though he really wanted to know what had just happened, he restrained himself. After all, he was just an apprentice, and there would be plenty of opportunities in the future. Chester Aston understood the look in the bald mage's eyes. His face was pale, and it was obvious that he'd been scared out of his wits. After all, the difference in strength and status between the two of them was too great. He didn't have the confidence to face a powerful mage head-on. Andre's lips curled up slightly when he saw the two's little movements, revealing a barely noticeable smile. He then raised his hand and snapped his fingers. His entire body was instantly enveloped in a white radiance, vanishing without a trace after a few seconds. Angus's eyes glinted fiercely as soon as he teleported away. He glared at the young man for a full minute before he opened his mouth to threaten. "Apprentice, don't you think you should take the initiative to explain your actions?" Although he was scared to death, Chester Aston still took a deep breath and put on a neither servile nor overbearing look. He bowed and said, "My apologies, Master. I've already received the Tower Master's permission to not reveal anything that happened just now to a third party." "Including me?" Angus' expression instantly turned ugly, and he asked with a fake smile. "That's right, including you." Chester Aston braced himself and retorted. To be honest, he was already starting to regret agreeing to Andre's conditions. Secretly monitoring a mage who was dozens of times more powerful than himself was obviously not an easy job. He might even lose his life if he didn't do it well. "Very good. Very good. I hope you won't regret the choice you've made today." When Angus realized that he wouldn't be able to get anything out of the young man, he flung his loose robe forcefully, turned around, and disappeared into the dim corridor. Chester Aston instantly breathed a sigh of relief as he watched the furious bald mage leave. He patted his chest lightly and smiled bitterly as he muttered to himself, "Is this the might of an advanced mage? It's really chilling. If it wasn't for the Tower Master's tacit approval, I'm afraid I would have been killed just now, sir. It seems that I have no other choice. I can only hope that the Tower Master can quickly fulfill his promise. Otherwise, my days in the future will be difficult. Just as the young man was sighing in self-pity, Andre had already passed through the spatial tunnel and appeared on the pitch-black sea at night. With the help of dark vision and flight, he easily located the arcane eye that was less than 500 meters away from him in the sky. This huge wooden sailboat was still as conspicuous as ever, even in the darkness. The waves splashed against the hull of the ship, creating waves of crashing sounds. Chapter 8:15. There was no need to hide anything, nor was there a need for disguise. Andre swaggered through the night sky and landed on the deck of the Arcane Eye. He had just landed, but before he could observe his surroundings, he immediately felt a sharp blade pressed against his back. Even though there was a row between them, he could still feel an icy chill on his skin. Don't move. Raise your hand slowly and put it where I can see it. Don't try any tricks, or I promise I'll send you to the world of the dead before you can make a sound. A figure wearing dark red scale armor and a black cloak walked out of the darkness along with a seductive voice. Her face couldn't be seen clearly because her entire face was covered by the hood, but Andre could still easily recognize her from the smell of sulfur in the air. He raised his hands cooperatively and greeted her without even turning his head. "Long time no see, my dear Eunice. Your concealment skills are becoming more and more outstanding. What? You can't even recognize me now." The figure in the black cloak trembled slightly as these words left his mouth. She gently removed the hood on her head and revealed an incomparably beautiful face. However, there were two thick and strong curved horns near the forehead above this beautiful face. Her eyes, emitting an evil red light, gave off a chaotic and evil feeling. Without a doubt, she was Eunice, who had half-demon blood. At the same time, she was Andre's first servant in the truest sense of the word. Are you a bit surprised to see me?" Andre turned around and stretched out his right hand to gently stroke the other party's cheek. His eyes were full of smiles. This was because he could sense that the demonic power within the body of this astonishingly charming Taflin had once again increased by leaps and bounds. If he didn't use his trump card, he would have to put in a lot of effort to defeat him with just his current mage rank. In this world where power reigned supreme, there was nothing more important than obtaining great power. Moreover, a powerful demonkin warrior servant was a rare helper for all mages. Perhaps Eunice had never thought that they would meet again in such a way. She was completely stunned. She opened her seductive red lips slightly, revealing her little tongue hidden inside. After more than a minute, she finally came back to her senses. She excitedly opened her arms and immediately gave him a warm hug. "Thank God. It's great that you're all right. You should know that when we saw you being swept into the sea, we thought you were already." Feeling the concern of the half-demon, Andre gently stroked her dark red hair and comforted her with a smile. "All right, don't worry, I'm fine. I even gained unimaginable benefits. Tell me, apart from you, who else came with you this time?" Before Eunice could answer, another beautiful figure rushed out from the cabin and hugged Andre's waist tightly from behind. She shouted in a surprised tone, "Aha, darling, it's really you. I knew you'd be fine. Of course. I can't bear to miss such a beautiful and cute fiancée." As he spoke, Andre reached out with his other hand and pulled the girl into his embrace. He lovingly pinched her little nose. Even though nothing had really happened between the two of them, he could still easily recognize that the person who came was the slightly childish Crowley from the moment her chest touched his back and the soft feeling and scale transmitted over. After all, among all the women he knew, only this young lowly had the youthfulness of a young girl. Her twin peaks were tall and straight, and she had a fiery personality. Chloe didn't say anything and immediately kissed the side of her lover's face deeply. Then, she playfully blinked and asked, After such a long time, did you miss me? Is there a need to ask this question? I've always kept you in my heart." Andre lied without batting an eyelid. Ever since he was stranded in Sardinia, he had been busy dealing with endless enemies. How could he have the time to think about love? However, this didn't stop him from saying some pretty words. After all, women were emotional creatures through and through. If you didn't go along with them, what awaited you would most likely be endless doubts. It was obvious that Andre was a smart person in this aspect. Without batting an eyelid, he had resolved a rather big problem. Just as he was about to continue asking about the composition of the fleet, he suddenly realized that there were many people he was familiar with on the deck. Among them were the mercenary Captain Uras, the Vice Captain Bartholomew, the elven druid Nina, and the crew members who were originally on the Eye of Mystical. There were also close allies like Lady Anastasia, Count George Mantell, and the president of the Association of Mages, Master Boris. Finally, there were dozens of powerful knights and hundreds of fully armed elite soldiers. They all wore different seals, and it was obvious that they were from more than a dozen noble families. Andre, who possessed extraordinary intelligence, realized in just a few seconds that this was actually a coalition fleet that had been put together at the last minute. They had only one purpose, and that was to rescue or help him. Thinking of this, he quickly let go of Eunice and Chloe in his arms. He quickly took 2 steps forward, placed one hand on his chest, and bowed slightly. Please allow me to express my most sincere gratitude to every gentleman and lady present. Thank you for lending me a helping hand when I needed it the most. Thank you even more for appearing in this extremely terrifying sea without fear of danger. I promise that every penny you've given today will be returned at least tenfold in the near future. At the same time, you'll also gain my friendship. Andre knew better than anyone that the so-called allies were actually a huge community of interests. You had to give when you asked for something. If you were too greedy and only knew how to ask, it wouldn't be long before this community of interests excluded you. Obviously, he had asked for a large amount of resources from his allies this time, including supplies, ships, soldiers, family knights, and so on. Therefore, he had to clearly tell them that he would give the same amount, or even several times the return, one day in the future. There was no love without a reason in this world, and similarly, there was no hatred without a reason. As a smart person, Andre understood very well why these people in front of him would take the risk to come here. Master Boris longed for a way to prolong his life. Lady Anastasia had her eyes on his future, and the conservative nobles led by Count George Mantell had tasted the huge benefits brought by the table salt trade. In short, each of them longed for benefits that could not be obtained elsewhere. Chapter 816. As the person with the highest position and the most honorable status on this ship, the president of the Association of Mages, Boris, was the first to step forward. He looked at Andre's right eye, which was the only part that was not covered, and a smile appeared on his wrinkled old face. Not bad at all. I can feel that the magic in your body has been greatly strengthened. For a mage, this means that your level has increased. I have to say that you have given me quite a pleasant surprise. Before I met you, I had never seen a young mage who could increase their magic storage by 30 times in just a few months. Tell me, young man, have you now come into contact with 5th-level arcane spells? As these words were blurted out, the faces of everyone standing around revealed unconcealable shock. Perhaps in the most prosperous days of the ancient magic civilization, a mage who had mastered 5th-level arcane spells could only be the assistant or servant of a great mage or a legendary mage. But in this era where magic was on the decline, it meant unparalleled destructive power. This was especially true for the famous Death Cloud spell. As long as it was used in a densely populated area, it could instantly cause the death of thousands of people. Even the most elite soldiers would immediately become lifeless corpses if they took even a small breath of it. Generally speaking, if the profession level did not exceed 7th level, it would be very powerless in the face of this spell. It should be known that 7th level professions, regardless of whether they were warriors, thieves, rangers, mages, warlocks, druids, or priests, could all be regarded as the elite of society. The proportion of them in the crowd was very small, which showed how terrifying a mage who had mastered 5th-level arcane spells was. What was even more frightening was that Andre's real age was not even 15 years old. Anyone who was not an idiot would know that he would surpass the great mage Boris in the near future, and even master 9th-level magic that could control time and space. Once they thought of being related to such a young man with endless potential, the eyes of everyone present burst out with a burning gaze. Without a doubt, they were all looking forward to an affirmative answer. That way, everything they had paid today would be exchanged for decades or even hundreds of years of stability and prosperity for their families. Feeling the atmosphere at the scene becoming more and more strange, Andre's lips curled up slightly, and he replied with a smile, "That's right, Master. I'm already a genuine 10th-level mage, and I also inherited the surname Branchflower not long ago." A 10th-tier sorcerer? Gods above, my ears didn't deceive me, did I? A nobleman in his 30s couldn't help but exclaim. The older man standing next to him glared at the man and reprimanded him in a low voice. "Idiot." The main point was the surname. Branchflower was an ancient family that was blessed by the fire element. It had disappeared for hundreds of years, and its appearance now meant that the Flaming Duke had been reborn. In other words, the person you're looking at is the new Flaming Duke, the master of fire that devours and destroys all things, the great existence praised by countless bards. The old man's words were like a meteorite thrown into a calm lake, instantly splashing huge waves. As a southern region where the Flaming Duke was most active, almost everyone knew what this name, which symbolized destruction and burning, meant. Boris did not pay attention to the nobles who were whispering behind him. He quickly stepped forward and grabbed Andre's shoulder. He asked anxiously, "Really? Have you really become the chosen of the fire elemental prince, Isoldezer?" "Of course. You see, the flames are now like a part of my body. Not only will I not be burned, but I can also recover from my injuries by bathing in the flames. Just like in the stories, as long as there is a trace of fire, the Flaming Duke will never die." As he spoke, Andre raised his right hand and instantly transformed it into a fire elemental form. The deep blue flames emitted a temperature of over 1,000 degrees in just a few seconds. Even from a few meters away, one could feel the heat waves blowing against their faces. As a smart person, he was very clear about which secrets could be shared with his allies, and which he should always hide in his heart. Even to his closest friends, he could not say a word about it. Obviously, the Flaming Duke was something he could share, but the secret of the Arcane was something he absolutely could not say a word about. The deep blue flames in the night sky were so beautiful and dazzling, firmly attracting everyone's attention. Some of the more superstitious sailors even knelt down and prayed devoutly. Perhaps in their eyes, the Flaming Duke, who had the power to destroy a city, was already no different from a god. So beautiful, such abundant energy, inexhaustible energy. This is the power of the Lord of the Raging Flames, a flame nourished by anger. Boris was completely captivated by the special characteristics of the deep blue flames. He revealed an unprecedented infatuation, wanting to touch it with his finger several times, but ultimately restraining himself. As a knowledgeable mage, he was very clear about the serious consequences of coming into contact with this kind of flame without the corresponding magic protection. In order to prevent this great mage from suddenly losing control, Andre returned his burning right hand to its normal state and softly reminded him, "Master, please remain calm. In any case, I've already become a user of the deep blue flames. There will be plenty of opportunities to study them in the future, so there is no need to be anxious." Hearing this, the infatuation in Boris's eyes quickly faded, replaced by a wise radiance as he nodded regretfully. "You are right, I was too impatient. You should know that the semi-elemental form itself has a lifespan of 1,000 years, and as the chosen of the fire elemental prince, Isoldezer, your lifespan is close to unlimited. Your experience is truly enviable. You obtain the thing that human mages need the most, time, for no reason at all. Although you are still unable to experience the short lifespan of a mere 100 years at your age, it has undoubtedly solved the last stumbling block on your path to magical knowledge. From the old man's tone, there was an unconcealable envy and jealousy. To him, who was on the verge of death, there was nothing more important than extending his lifespan. Andre was keenly aware of this. He bowed slightly and said with a smile, You don't have to worry at all, dear master. If you are not picky, I can immediately help you obtain a lifespan of a few hundred years, or even 1,000 years. Apart from some minor side effects, it will definitely not affect your continued study of the mysteries of magic. Chapter 817. Boris was already 140 years old. For a human, this was already an extremely long life. If he hadn't taken the life-prolonging potion, he would have started to die 30 or 40 years ago. In fact, he'd been searching for ways to extend his lifespan since he was 50 years old, but unfortunately, he'd failed in the end. As a genuine great wizard, he couldn't tolerate those inferior methods, such as turning himself into a low-level undead creature, nor could he tolerate the slightest bit of damage to his intelligence. Now that he'd suddenly heard a method that could immediately extend his lifespan, he was instantly overjoyed. However, his long-cultivated habit of being cautious allowed him to quickly suppress his emotional fluctuations. He asked seriously, "Tell me, what is your method, and what are the so-called small side effects?" Andre smiled faintly and replied softly, "It's very simple. Not long ago, I just happened to catch a living vampire spawn. As long as you drain its blood and inject it into your veins, you'll immediately obtain a lifespan equivalent to a vampire's. The only drawback is that it'll be turned into an undead creature, and will need to drink fresh blood every once in a while." Vampire? You're saying you caught a living vampire spawn? Boris could no longer conceal the shock in his heart and grabbed Andre's wrist. Of course, great wizard. He's currently locked up in the Wizard Tower's dungeon 500 meters below Valent City. If you wish, you can start any time. In fact, according to what I know, there are quite a few vampires in this archipelago. There's even a direct heir from the Siamni family. His name is Gillis Siamni, and he's the youngest son of Duke Calvin. Saying this, an imperceptible smile appeared on Andre's face. He was very clear how attractive a descendant of a vampire duke was to an old wizard nearing the end of his life. After all, whether it was in terms of research or obtaining a vampire's physique, a pureblood would always be 100 times stronger than a spawn. If he was lucky, he might even be able to trace the bloodline and discover the method to become a vampire duke. After all, a vampire duke's battle prowess wasn't much weaker than a great wizard's. Add to that the absolute control they had over their descendants, and they could create an undead army of unprecedented scale in just a few days. Without a doubt, Boris was tempted. His eyes shone with a fiery light. Although becoming a vampire would bring about all kinds of problems, such as becoming a permanent member of the evil faction, or being afraid of the sun, or anything that contained positive energy, there was one thing that he valued the most, and that was that it would not affect his intelligence, nor would it affect his level as a magician. In other words, if he was a level 14 mage before the transformation, he would still be a level 14 mage after the transformation. His spell slots, arcane spells, and so on would not change at all. Andre was keenly aware of the old mage's thoughts. He immediately lowered his voice and suggested, "Master, you don't have to rush to make a decision. My previous promise is still valid. Anyway, you still have enough time. Why don't you wait for a while? You're saying the effect of that spell will be better than turning into a vampire?" Boris leaned forward and whispered into his ear, "Sorry, I don't know much about this, but in my opinion, it's always good to have more options, isn't it?" Andre also whispered into the other party's ear, using a voice that only the two of them could hear to give an answer. Ever since he became a level 10 mage, he was already qualified to decipher the spell books left behind by Ulysses Domer. It was just that he hadn't had the time yet. The purpose of this suggestion was very simple. He didn't want to lose the help of a great mage too quickly, and he didn't want to take over the mess of the Association of Mages without sufficient preparation. After all, once President Boris turned into an undead or sees a new body, it meant that he could no longer stay in the Association of Mages. On one hand, it was because of the pressure from the Church of the Good God, and, on the other hand, it was because of the strong rejection from the mages. Boris stroked the short beard on his chin and nodded thoughtfully. What you said makes sense. I really don't need to be in too much of a hurry. Right, you mentioned the underground mage tower in Valence City just now. Could it be that you've successfully deceived Gerald Jenkinson? Andre smiled and spread out his hands. No, it's even better than that. I killed him, and now the entire mage tower is under my control. What? You actually killed Gerald Jenkinson? Boris subconsciously took a step back, his eyes revealing a look of shock. As the president of the Linton Spell Warrior Association, he knew all too well of Gerald Jenkinson's abilities. He couldn't believe what he'd just heard. Yes, he's dead. Even his soul has been imprisoned and turned into a spirit crystal pillar. If you want to see your old friend with your own eyes, I can definitely arrange it. Andre explained very calmly. Boris took a deep breath and forced himself to calm down. He then muttered to himself, "All right, it seems that a lot has happened to you during this period of time." Andre shrugged indifferently. That's right. Just like you said, too many things have happened during this period of time. I'll slowly tell you about it when there's time. Right now, the most important thing is to tell me how many soldiers this fleet is carrying. I might need them in the future. As soon as he finished speaking, Count George, who had been standing not too far away, took 2 steps forward and laughed loudly. Ha ha ha. My friend, don't worry. I've contacted 10 powerful nobles this time and brought 800 fully armed elite soldiers in 12 nights. I've also contacted a few nobles that have close trade relations with us and brought 300 soldiers in 5 nights. In addition to the sailors, mercenaries, and barbarian warriors on your ship, there are about 1,600 soldiers in 20 nights. Lady Anastasia quickly added, 1,600 people? I think that should be enough. Andre rubbed his chin and nodded thoughtfully. He then opened his arms and gave each of them a warm hug. Thank you very much. You arrived in time to solve a big problem for me. Lady Anastasia kissed Andre's cheek and replied, You're welcome. We're a family and should help each other. My dear friend, I've said before that as long as you need it, we can mobilize 3,000 private soldiers in 50 nights at any time. Due to the time constraints and the limited space on the ship, we couldn't bring them all. I hope you don't mind. Perhaps it was because he realized that his investment could be returned tenfold or even 100-fold. Old George was in a very good mood and even took the initiative to joke. Chapter 8:18. Of course I don't mind. In fact, I'm already very surprised that you could arrive at such a crucial moment. Not long ago, I received news that the Linton City Navy led by Mikhail Kerman was annihilated by the pirates in Bakharov City. Only a few managed to escape. Some of the pirates were even planning to use this opportunity to attack Linton City and destroy the largest shipyards in one fell swoop. They would also take away all the shipbuilders and make Linton City unable to build even a single warship in a short period of time. This way, they would be able to quickly strengthen themselves and dominate the entire southern seas. When that happens, every merchant ship on the sea would become delicious prey. Believe me, if you were just a little bit late, you would undoubtedly be trapped in the harbor, captured or sunk. With a smile on his face, Andre revealed a piece of news that made everyone tremble in fear, especially the few nobles who had close ties with the sea trade. Their eyes were filled with unconcealable fear, and their foreheads were dripping with sweat. Even though they were all conservatives, and their main income came from manors, mines, and artisanal workshops, these things still needed ships to be sold to other ports and countries. Since ships were needed, they were part of the sea trade. If Linton City's sea hegemony was taken over by the pirates, it was easy to imagine what would happen next. Due to the lack of necessary transportation, a large number of goods would be squeezed and unsaleable. Countless merchants would go bankrupt, and the residents would not be able to find work. The originally prosperous Linton city would decline to an unimaginable level in just a few years. The destruction of the huge navy would be a catastrophe for the entire Linton city. From the poor beggars to the nobles and mages, no one would be spared. Old George's smile instantly froze on his face. His hands trembled uncontrollably. After a full minute, he asked urgently, "Tell me, you must have a solution, right?" Looking at the other party's fearful eyes, Andre nodded unhurriedly and replied softly, "That's right, my lord. That's right, my dear Count. My goal is to take down the pirates' lair before they come back. Then, when Francis returns with his fleet, I will launch a surprise attack and nip the thread in the bud." As everyone knew, no matter how terrifying a fleet was, it needed a safe and reliable logistics base, and Sardinia was the only natural harbor that could reach the entire Southern Ocean. As long as we can control it, we can control all the pirates in this area, including a huge smuggling network hidden in the dark. Think about it. What would it mean to have these resources in their hands? The answer is very simple. It means that we can control dozens of large port cities in the entire southern region, as well as hundreds of towns and villages within their radiation range. We will become the uncrowned kings of the entire southern region. Even the whale merchant group will have to submit to us. It had to be said that Andre's words were full of bewitchment. Many young nobles began to breathe faster, and their eyes revealed a burning light. After all, they had received elite education from a young age and were well aware of the importance of channels for trade and commodity circulation. To put it bluntly, in this backward world where traveling was basically done by walking and communication was basically done by shouting, whoever grasped the middle link of the commodity circulation would be on the highway to wealth. It wasn't just wealth, but also the power that came with it. Merchants and nobles would be like dogs chasing meat bones, madly flocking to Sardinia to curry favor with the ruler here. Money, power, and great fame and influence. Almost no one could resist such temptation. However, Count George clearly had some misgivings in his heart. After much consideration, he finally couldn't help but raise his doubts. "My apologies, my friend. Even though you've shown us an unparalleled future, it won't be easy to achieve this. First, you have to deal with the pirate castle at the highest point of Valence City. It's easy to defend and hard to attack. Normal methods won't work. If we attack by force, it won't matter even if all 1,600 people die. Secondly, the number of pirates loyal to Francis is rather large. How do you plan on wiping them all out? Even if only a small portion of them escape, they'll be able to turn the entire sea upside down. With the number of warships we currently have, there's nothing we can do. Lastly, and most importantly, why did you invite us to join? Why not choose to control everything by yourself? I believe that with the Flaming Duke's strength, he'll definitely be able to do it." As the last word left his mouth, the originally excited nobles quickly calmed down. Their eyes were filled with suspicion and wariness. Even Countess Anastasia of Westia was no exception. It couldn't be helped. The thinking of the ruling class of this world was still in a very backward state. They always wanted to monopolize as many markets and resources as possible, and almost never considered cooperation. They simply didn't understand that when it came to markets and trade, the more people and the larger the scale, the more profits would be obtained. The difference between the two was like a small biscuit and a large cake. The former was hiding in a corner and secretly eating a small biscuit. Even though there was no need to share it with others, the biscuit was only that big and would be gone once it was finished. The latter, on the other hand, was tasting a large cake with many people. Perhaps they couldn't swallow it all, but because the cake was big enough, everyone would get a bigger slice than the biscuit. In the 21st century on Earth, even the worst ruler and businessman understood that no matter which industry wanted to develop, the first thing to do was to make the cake bigger. Only then could a large-scale industrial chain be formed and a large amount of wealth could be generated. Today, Andre had to convey this idea to his allies and then tightly unite them around him. Otherwise, he wouldn't be able to complete such a complicated plan alone. Sweeping his gaze across the pairs of doubtful eyes, Andre suddenly revealed a confident smile. However, he wasn't in a hurry to explain. Instead, he turned to the president and said, "Master, can I ask you for a small favor? My dear friends obviously lack confidence in me. Could you please tell them about the power I have at my disposal?" Boris sighed helplessly. "All right, but before that, you have to tell me, is the Mage Tower really under your control?" Chapter 819. Of course, Master. As long as I give the order, all the resources and energy within the Wizard Tower can be transferred without limit at any time. Just as the name implies, everything is under my control. Even the core area of the Wizard Tower is no exception. Andre was well aware of the hidden meaning behind this question and gave an affirmative answer without hesitation. After all, a Wizard Tower wasn't something that could be operated by one or two people. It required a large number of mages, apprentices, and servants, in addition to the cooperation of all kinds of summoned magical creatures. It was like the large-scale, cutting-edge laboratories on Earth. Even the most genius scientist wouldn't be able to handle everything alone. Of course, this wasn't absolute. Mages above level 17 could cast a level 9 spell called Awaken the Tower Spirit, causing the entire Wizard Tower to come to life and possess the ability to analyze and think independently, managing most things on its own. Unfortunately, this powerful spell wasn't something that just anyone could cast. With the structure of Valen City's underground Wizard Tower and the skill of its builder, it was impossible to have a tower spirit. Thus, the question of the chairman became extremely important. This was because an empty Wizard Tower after a massacre and a fully staffed Wizard Tower were two completely different concepts. Without a doubt, as a powerful transformation wizard, Boris was well aware of the huge difference between the two. Thus, he wanted to confirm the true situation of the Wizard Tower. Although Andre didn't directly reveal the situation within the Wizard Tower, he gave a guarantee that the Wizard Tower could operate normally. It could be said that the two spellcasters had completed a private exchange of information without the knowledge of outsiders. As they had both used code, the surrounding people were completely confused and had no idea what the two mages were talking about. Boris shot a meaningful glance at Andre, then turned to face Count George Mantell and the conservative nobles and explained in a deep voice, "Don't worry. Listen, I don't expect you to understand the greatness of magic, nor do I expect you to understand the immense power of a Wizard Tower. All you need to know is that Andre can now monitor and control all supernatural forces within several kilometers of Pirate City. He can even easily summon storms and send down destructive flames and lightning. Unless there are at least 5 great mages like me working together, no one can stop him from doing what he wants to do." This was the importance of a fully functional Wizard Tower to a wizard. In essence, a castle made of stone or a ship made of wood was no different from a piece of soft bread that had just been baked in front of a Wizard Tower. I don't know if you can understand my explanation. Compared to the overly young Andre, President Boris, who controlled the entire Linton City Mage Association, was undoubtedly more persuasive. Looking at Countess Anastasia's shocked expression, she was completely frightened by the president's description. In her impression, Andre should be a young man who matured early, was wise, and was full of potential. Perhaps his spellcasting ability was quite outstanding among his peers, and he had many ideas that could make a lot of money. But no matter how she looked at it, she couldn't associate him with the word powerful. Now, a great mage actually said that he would need 5 of himself to defeat Andre, who had the help of a mage tower. This was simply unbelievable. Andre ignored the shock, awe, and fear in most people's eyes and asked with a smile, "How is it, my dear Count? Do you have a little more confidence in me now?" Old George smiled bitterly and nodded. "Of course, I have always had confidence in you, although this news is a bit shocking. But I still want to know, why did you choose to cooperate with us?" "Ha ha 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 ha." Andre suddenly laughed out loud without any warning. "Count, my dear Count," he replied, shaking his finger with a smile, "that is a rather foolish question of yours. The answer is obvious. My plan is huge, and I need the help of allies. You must know that building a transportation system that dominates the entire Southern Sea is not an easy task. Not only does it require a large number of warships and merchant ships, but also requires a clear understanding of the specialties and goods of each port city, town, and village. Such a huge preparation work requires the cooperation of countless people, and you're the first batch of collaborators that I have chosen. You should know very well that I have never been a person who is greedy for power or money. On the contrary, I am willing to share them with my friends, and I believe that the salt trade is enough to prove my sincerity. Now tell me, are you willing to join hands with me to create what may be the largest commercial alliance in human history? Don't be in a hurry to answer. Think about it carefully. I will say the ugly words first. Although I am very generous in some aspects, I am very stingy in other aspects, and I cannot tolerate any form of betrayal. If I find out that anyone here betrays me in the future, even if it is just a little, then he and his family will be ruthlessly destroyed, whether his body or soul. Of course, in order to show my sincerity, I will show a part of my strength tonight, and I hope your answer will not disappoint me. After that, Andre politely bowed and raised his hand to draw a magical symbol in the air. In an instant, a huge amount of magic energy surged from the bottom of the sea and quickly enveloped the entire fleet like glass, flashing with a dazzling brilliance. In just a few seconds, the energy formed a layer of faint membrane, which looked like a translucent cover from the inside. Just as everyone was wondering what was going on, President Boris stretched out his finger to feel the strength of the magic in the air and quickly revealed a smile. Not bad, a very perfect spell structure. Although it is a little unstable, it will definitely be able to fool the eyes of ordinary people. Andre, your talent in the field of arcane magic is simply unparalleled, and you have already begun to create your own magic. No, Master, this is only an obstruction spell, and can't be considered a real spell. As you have mentioned, it is not stable, and at best, it only uses the principle of light refraction. Andre very humbly bowed. While the two of them were talking, the fleet circled around the side of the island and slowly sailed into the calm harbor. The lookouts at the top of the cliff and the castle did not notice them at all. All they saw was a ball of darkness where they could not even see their own fingers. Chapter 820. More than 10 minutes later, the fleet led by the Eye of Arcane carefully docked at the empty dock. Thanks to the monstrous waves set off by the goddess of the sea not long ago, all the ships docked nearby were lifted to the shore and smashed to pieces without exception. Therefore, at a glance, there was not even a shadow of a ghost. Even the ratmen who controlled the nearby territories had disappeared without a trace. Of course, if it was just silence, it would not be enough to stun the experienced sailors. What really frightened and terrified them was precisely the energy wall that separated the entire city. These walls that emitted a dazzling halo were like auroras. They looked extremely beautiful from afar. Even the most idiotic guy could feel the great power contained in them. Oh, my God, what the hell is this? Old George held the amulet hanging around his neck tightly and muttered to himself in amazement. It's the large-scale coverage of the Force Wall spell. If I'm not wrong, the magic that can maintain this scale must come from the power of the Wizard Tower. Am I right? With that, President Boris turned his head and stared at Andre, trying to get an affirmative answer. As the controller of the Wizard Tower in Linton City, he knew all too well that every Wizard Tower would more or less have several powerful trump cards hidden up their sleeves. Among them, there are things like detonating earthquakes, tsunamis, volcanic eruptions, and other things that would cause mutual destruction. There are also measures like isolation, control, expulsion, and so on that he saw before his eyes. In short, in order to ensure the safety of their lives and property, as well as their vital interests not being infringed upon, the wizards would do almost anything. They had always been selfish and did not care whether it would affect innocent people. In human history, There were many powerful spellcasters who went crazy and directly razed their own areas to the ground. The number of casualties was in the tens of millions. When some cities approved the construction of the Wizard Tower, they often had to go through a series of strict approvals and inspections to ensure that the crazy wizards would not plant a big bomb in the heart of the city. Feeling the president's gaze, Andre smiled and shrugged his shoulders. You guessed right. This is indeed one of the trump cards of the Wizard Tower. Due to the riots in the city at present, I have to use some extreme measures. Don't worry, after our soldiers have rested on shore, I'll remove all the force walls and comb through the entire city from top to bottom. I'll also take care of the castle that stands at the highest point. In a day or two at most, Pirate King Francis will lead part of the fleet back. I hope to give him a big surprise then. Big surprise? Haha, I think it's more like a shock. Boris chuckled and shook his head. Tell me, how do you plan to deal with the fortress at the highest point of the city? If I remember correctly, the stones there have been specially processed and have very strong magic resistance. Whether it's stone to mud or other transformation spells, it's very difficult to have any effect. Magic? No, Master, I never intended to use magic to deal with the pirate's castle. I intended to attack it head-on. You may not know this, but the ship under our feet has very good siege weapons. There is no need to waste the precious energy of the Mage Tower. After saying that, Andre turned around and glanced at the bronze cannon placed on the deck. Although in his opinion, these heavy firearms were quite primitive, they had been through the most scientific design. The length of the cannon was more than 20 times the diameter of the cannon bore. Coupled with the best proportion of granular gunpowder, it may be difficult to break the magically reinforced stones, but it was absolutely no problem to blow open the iron gate outside the gate. Old George had obviously heard of the glorious battle results of the Eye of Arcane. He stretched out a hand and stroked a cold cannon beside him. He asked, "This is the alchemy weapon that you personally forged? Is its power really as terrifying as the legends say?" Andre replied with a smile. "There's a good saying that goes, seeing is believing. My friend, don't worry, you'll see its power tonight." As soon as his voice fell, he immediately ordered Bartholomew, "I'll give you an hour to unload half of the cannons and ammunition on the ship. I'll use them to blow up the castle gate tonight." Don't worry, since the last sneak attack, the crew has been holding back their anger. I swear, as long as you give the order, even if it's a mountain of swords or a sea of fire, they'll give it a try. The old captain patted his chest and promised with a grim smile. Andre nodded with satisfaction. "Very good, then hurry up and move. Remember, everyone must be quiet. Before I give the order to attack, no one is allowed to make a sound, let alone light a fire. Understand?" "Understood." Bartholomew bowed with one hand on his chest. He then began to wave his arms, indicating that the soldiers in the cabin could go ashore first. Under the coordination of the knights, hundreds of noble private soldiers dressed in armor, armed with shields, swords, spears, and crossbows, walked on a deck one after another and boarded the dock along the planks. They had obviously undergone strict training. Even after drifting on the sea for several days, they did not feel the slightest bit of discomfort. In just half an hour, they had already lined up in a neat square in the open space, checking their equipment while resting to recover their physical strength. As for the remaining sailors, they used levers and pulleys to dismantle the bronze cannons together with the cannon carriage from the Eye of Arcane and place them on the carriages that had been prepared in advance. Everything seemed to be in order, just as Andre was thinking about whether to take the castle by surprise first or to eliminate the rat men and underground guilds fighting in the upper city. A slightly fat guy suddenly appeared next to him. He was wiping the sweat on his forehead while squeezing out a flattering smile. He bent down and bowed deeply, holding up the things in his hands high. "Honorable sir, this is your mage badge and seal ring. I did not disappoint you and successfully completed the task you entrusted to me." Obviously, this fat guy was none other than the smuggler, Tim, who had taken on the mission of delivering the letter not long ago. However, Andre noticed that he also seemed to be wearing a silver ring engraved with complicated patterns on his finger. The corners of his mouth curled up slightly, revealing a hint of playfulness. "Mr. Tim, no, perhaps I should call you Sir Tim now. I have to say, your fast ship is really impressive. In such a short time, you completed the magnificent feat of going back and forth between the Sardinia Islands and Linton City. So, have you gotten the reward you wanted as you wished?" With that, Andre picked up the mage badge and put it on his chest, then put the seal ring that symbolized his noble status on his ring finger. At the same time, he looked at the audacious fat merchant in front of him with great interest. Chapter 8:21. As a smuggler who had traveled extensively and occasionally acted as a pirate, Tim's skin was as thick as the city walls. He was completely immune to any form of contempt and mockery, let alone this harmless stare. He wiped his face slightly, not knowing if it was fat or sweat. He touched the ring on his finger and laughed heartily. "Ha ha! Thanks to your blessing, I am now a knight recognized by the Parliament of Nobles in Linton City. Not only have I obtained the noble status that I've always dreamed of, but I've also received a large reward. To be honest, I still feel like I'm in a dream. You are the messenger sent by the goddess of fortune. Please forgive me for being a little incoherent, because I can't find any better words to express my gratitude to you." Andre shrugged nonchalantly. "Since you've already gotten what you wanted, why did you still take the risk to follow the fleet back to Sardinia? What gave you such courage? Or is there some interest that drove you to play with your life?" As a smart person, he didn't think that the fat merchant came to him just to return the seal ring and the mage badge. There must be some other purpose behind it. Merchants pursued profit. This was not only their nature, but also a manifestation of human desire. If a merchant suddenly started to flatter you, then don't hesitate. He must have some kind of strong desire for you. Seeing that his little trick didn't work, Tim wasn't discouraged. Instead, he rubbed his hands together in a very unscrupulous manner. "Hee, you really have a sharp eye. That's right, I did run into a little trouble. I hope you can help me out on the account that I'm quite efficient in my work." "Oh, tell me, what kind of trouble did you run into?" Andre lightly knocked on the guardrail on the deck. He didn't agree, but he didn't reject immediately either. This attitude made Tim feel uneasy. After hesitating for a few seconds, he carefully said, "It's actually not a big deal. It's just that after receiving the title of knight, I found that I couldn't integrate into the noble circle at all. The other nobles completely ignore my existence. They ignore my invitations and even my greetings." After hearing Tim's request, Andre couldn't help but smile and shake his head. He asked in return, "Do you know why? Why? Could it be that my title is fake? Or is it because I used to be a smuggler?" Tim blinked his eyes in confusion. In the past, he was just a nobody. He had never come into contact with the upper class and did not understand the social rules of the aristocratic circle. "No, neither, my dear merchant. There are three main reasons why they won't accept you. First, you can't bring them enough benefits. Second, you don't have enough power to deserve their attention. Third, you're not a descendant of a noble. Do you know? In fact, the nobles of Linton City are already quite open-minded. If you were in a more traditional kingdom in the north, a newly promoted noble like you would not only be excluded from the circle, but you would also be suppressed. This situation would probably continue for decades, or even centuries, until your family had many marriages with other families and completely assimilated into them. To put it bluntly, the aristocrats used all kinds of methods to form an alliance of interests. In order to protect their own interests and allow this alliance to continue, they set up countless rules that were beneficial to them and severely rejected intruders. Among them, the bloodline theory was one of the most important. Being born noble was the core of their code of conduct. This not only ensured that the descendants of the nobles firmly held the ruling position, but also ensured that the family would have a chance to rise again after its decline. If you want to quickly gain the recognition of the nobles, I'll give you a few suggestions. First, hire a tutor who is proficient in etiquette. A good upbringing is always the key to a good first impression. Second, start cultivating an interest in literature and art. Otherwise, you'll find that you won't be able to find a common topic at balls and salons. Lastly, and most importantly, do your best to do business with the nobles and display your value to the greatest extent. When they realize that you're a goose that can lay golden eggs, it'll be fine even if the first two are useless. In order to let the fat merchant understand his situation, Andre explained the way the nobles thought in great detail, even down to the most essential part. He was well aware of how much risk the other party had taken in the process of delivering the letter, especially by forcibly increasing the ship's speed to the limit. The slightest carelessness would have caused the ship to capsize and ultimately be buried in the sea. Therefore, he wanted to use this method to give some compensation in return. One must know that in this world, there is probably no other person who could have such a profound understanding of the feudal system and the nobles like him. Greatly enlightened, Tim's eyes revealed a trace of understanding. Then he sighed helplessly and said, "Alas, so that's how it is. I'm now like a hyena that broke into a pride of lions. What I need to consider is not how to gain the recognition of the lions, but how to protect myself first." That's right. Looks like you already know what to do. Please remember, since you're a merchant, you should first do your job well. After all, when your wealth reaches a certain level, your power will naturally follow. All right, that's all for today's talk. I still have a lot of things to do. After saying that, Andre lightly patted the fat merchant's shoulder, turned around and left the deck of the Eye of Mystical and walked towards the dock. But before he could take a few steps, he heard Tim shouting from behind, "Wait, please wait. I still have something to say." Hearing this, Andre stopped in his tracks. "Say it. Try be quick. I'm in a hurry." "It's like this. I've just heard someone mention that you seem to be planning to establish a huge trading system that radiates across the entire Southern Sea with the Sardinia Islands as the center. I wonder if I can join in?" After hesitating for a while, Tim finally couldn't help but speak of the desire hidden in the depths of his heart. After receiving this news, he instantly realized that this was an excellent opportunity. If he couldn't act before the nobles responded, then he would have nothing to do in the future. Looking at the merchant's small, bright eyes, Andre suddenly laughed without warning, and he laughed very happily. While laughing, he asked, "Please tell me, my dear Tim, do you think you're qualified to be my ally?" Chapter 822. What was an ally? To put it simply, an ally was a friend formed by forming an alliance for common interests or goals. That was to say, they must first have common interests and goals, and then they must be good friends. Only then could they be called allies. Did Tim and Andre have common interests and goals? Obviously no, because the two were not on the same level in terms of financial resources, social status, or personal power. If one had to use a word to describe it, it would be the difference between an elephant and an ant. In the face of such a huge gap, not to mention common interests, Andre could easily crush the smuggler Tim with just a little finger. Then, could they be considered friends? The answer was undoubtedly no. At most, the two could only be regarded as having made a deal, and then each took what they needed. At best, they were acquaintances, not even acquaintances. In fact, whether it was choosing allies or friends, Andre had always followed a principle, and that was to a certain extent equality. A lion and a rabbit could not be friends. An eagle could not be allies with a sparrow, and a spellcaster with powerful supernatural powers could not be friends or allies with a lowly smuggler. The relationship between them could be one of sympathy, charity, or hunter and prey. The only difference between them was that they were not friends and allies. Perhaps some people would say that friends must first be sincere, and persistence in identity or status could not be regarded as real friends at all. But these people had never considered that the real world was not a fairy tale, and the interactions between people were basically mixed with all kinds of interests. Pure feelings were not non-existent, but they absolutely could not be maintained for a long time. As a rational person, Andre had always been very cautious when choosing allies. He did not choose those who were too strong, because this was likely to lead to the weak being swallowed up, and he also did not choose those who were too weak, because when cooperating, the effort and the return of the two sides were completely disproportionate. Obviously, Tim was not in his consideration from the beginning, but he was still willing to listen to what the other party had to say. If the other party could offer conditions that he was interested in, then he would not mind letting this fat merchant have a share of the profits. Tim seemed to feel Andre's attitude and subconsciously clenched his fists. He wanted to speak several times, but for some reason, he swallowed his words. He knew that he only had one chance to speak. Once he spoke, it would mean that there was no turning back. After much deliberation and hesitation, he seemed to have made up his mind. After taking a deep breath, he carefully took out a crumpled parchment from his bosom. "Sir, perhaps in your eyes, I'm just a low-class smuggler. Although my profits are quite generous, I'll never be able to live openly under the sun. I'm just as disgusting as a dirty fly or a bedbug. But there's a common saying among the Valen City pirates that snakes have snake paths and rats have rat paths. Every creature has its own way of survival. Anyone who can survive in these waters must have some unknown secrets, and my method is this map. Not only does it record the maze-like sewers under the city, but it also records all the places where ships can pass through the complicated waters of Sardinia. I believe this map will help you quickly defeat the enemies hiding in the dark." After saying that, Tim handed over the precious map that he had kept for who knew how many years with both hands. It had to be said that he made a very wise choice. He didn't beat around the bush, nor did he try to negotiate. He just generously took out his most precious item. Andre glanced at him meaningfully and reached out to take the map. As he looked at it carefully, he said in a playful tone, "Do you know what I admire the most about you, my dear Tim?" The fat merchant shook his head with a bitter smile. "Sorry, sir. I'm just a stupid merchant. I can't understand the thoughts of a powerful mage like you." No. You're not stupid at all, Mr. Tim." Andre shook his finger lightly, his expression gradually becoming serious. "On the contrary, you're very smart, even smarter than the nobles on the ship. You can always make a choice that benefits you at the right time. Of course, this isn't the most important thing. The most important thing is that you can clearly recognize your own abilities and your position. You must know that the people in this world are either overly confident or overly inferior. There are too few people who know their own limits. If you can keep this up, then I believe that in the near future, you will be able to realize your dreams. Finally, thank you for the map that you provided. It will save me a lot of trouble in the next operation." As the last word left his mouth, Andre lightly patted the merchant's shoulder and walked straight to the direction where the soldiers were gathered. "Hey, sir, do I have the qualifications to be your ally now?" Tim asked in a loud voice with uncertainty. As a merchant, he was eager to know if his efforts would be rewarded. "No, you are now." Andre turned around and winked with a smile. Without a doubt, he liked this fat guy who was a little greedy, a little witty, and would never ask for too much. After receiving a positive answer, Tim immediately waved his arms excitedly and shouted, "Thank you, sir. Thank you for your generosity and kindness. I promise to fulfill my obligations as an ally. No matter what happens in the future, I swear that I will never betray you." Andre waved his hand without turning his head, indicating that he had heard him. He didn't respond at all. He was very clear that the fat merchant's words were from the bottom of his heart, but who could say for sure what would happen in the future? After all, in the face of benefits, even blood relatives could turn against each other. Rather than believe in those illusory promises, it was better to grasp the present and formulate a perfect set of rules to eliminate all possible threats in the bud. After a simple rest, more than 1,600 soldiers had recovered their strength and were waiting for the order to set off. Although they still didn't know who the enemy was and how many there were, they still maintained a high morale. A few knights and nobles who knew the inside story gathered together and discussed in whispers how to minimize the casualties. After all, the private army was their capital to establish themselves in Linton City. If they lost too many soldiers at once, it wouldn't be easy to replenish them. You're tuning into the Warrior Lore YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.